You hit record. And I want to, before we get back into it, I just kind of want to have a discussion, do a little recap. First off, we left talking about dual agency, and then we took dual agency a step further. And if the firm allows, we have the opportunity to offer designated dual agency. So first off, everybody keep in mind, the firm has to allow designated. Not all firms, this is not an automatic thing. If the firm doesn't have a policy in place, for example, then the agents in the firm can't offer designated to their clients. And we're going to talk about later this morning, we're going to talk about how we know what to offer the consumer, how the consumer knows what we have to offer them. So we're going to get into our agency disclosure in just a bit. Remember the simplest definition I can offer you guys when it comes to dual agency. Show me, how many firms is dual agency? How many firms are involved? How many firms? Always one firm. How many transactions in dual agency? How many transactions? Just one. How many clients? How many clients? How many people have hired the firm? Two. So the simplest definition, I'm not my coffee over if I'm not careful. The simplest definition that I can offer you of dual agency is one firm, one transaction, two clients. Dual can be one or two. Designated dual is always two agents, two brokers involved in the transaction. But the big thing that we really need to understand, dual agency, thus designated dual agency, is one firm, one transaction, two clients. So let's review and let's talk about this for just a minute. Your seller, a seller, has hired 123 Main Street to help them list and sell, market their property. A buyer that has also hired the firm or is interested in hiring the firm is interested in purchasing 123 Main Street. Both buyer and seller, it's the same transaction. Yes, the seller is selling 123 Main Street, the buyer is buying 123 Main Street. That's what we mean by same transaction. Both buyer and seller have hired the firm to assist them in this transaction, and that's what we're looking at with dual and designated agency. We talked last week about offering dual and designated agency to our sellers and our buyers, making sure that we have it's intentionally created with informed written consent. Excuse me, dual agency does not just happen. It happens purposely. It's intentionally created with informed written consent. In other words, we have to have conversations with our consumers about if we're going to practice dual, how does that look? What does that mean to you? And we walked through a couple scenarios last week of you're at the listing appointment and you ask the seller if they want to do dual and they say no. That's up to them. They need to understand what they're saying no to is all buyer clients from that firm. Can the firm bring their buyer customer? Shake your head, yes or no. Can the firm bring their buyer customer to the transaction? We got some hesitation. Can the firm bring their buyer customer? The answer is yes, because dual agency is how many clients? Both of them are clients. There are no customers. Everybody's in first class. We also talked about the other side of that coin. You've been working with a buyer for months and months and months, and they haven't found the one yet. And then all of a sudden your firm lists one today that they're interested in. We need to get the buyer's permission to do dual agency. And if they say no, then I'm sorry, I can't show you the property. So again, it's important that buyers and sellers understand what we're getting into, what they are getting into. Again, we're going to get into and talk about our disclosure. But I will say again, I hope you guys Spent a little bit of time with those agency agreements this weekend, particularly where they explain dual agency. The
I'm
listing.
sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. You just confused. I don't want to continue. I'm confused. You asked, could a firm bring their buyer customer? And you said the answer is yes, but then you said they can have two clients. I thought the client and customer were different.
No, ma'am, they're two different things. The client hires me. The customer does not. The
I know
client
that's
gets
what I said.
OPCAR. The customer gets honesty and fairness and the
I,
disclosure material
that's
fact.
I'm sorry. Maybe you can't hear me clearly. That's exactly what I just said. I thought they were two different people.
They
So
are.
when you okay, so when you said can the firm bring the buyer customer, I said no. Now, if you would have said client, I would have said yes. So I'm confused, but you said it, they could bring a customer. So I'm all the way confused
If
right now.
if back up, we said if the seller says no to dual, if the seller says no to dual,
Okay.
can we bring our buyer client?
Okay, I missed that part. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So let's say you guys are working with your firms. Let's say we are, you guys are with Julie's Real Estate Shop and you all have your license and you're with Julie's Real Estate Shop. And we have meeting this morning. We have a sales meeting. And I'm going around and I'm talking about all the upcoming announcements and maybe we have an event coming up and don't forget we got training next week and yada yada, just doing our sales meeting stuff. And then I ask if any of you have any new listings coming on. Does anybody have any new listings coming on this week? One of you pops your hand up and you say, yeah, I got a cute one coming. It's coming the end of the week. It is a 3-bed, 2-bath. It's got a garage. It's not in an HOA. It's located here, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm describing the property, did you learn anything confidential about the client? When I talk about a 3-bed, 2-bath with a garage, what does that tell you about my seller? Absolutely nothing. We can talk about the property all day long. That's the product that we're selling. That property that we have advertised on like Zillow and Realtor.com, that's what we're advertising to the whole world, right? 3-bed, 2-bath with a garage located here, da 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 da. We can talk about the property all day long. Where we need to be careful, where we need to be aware is when that conversation switches gears from the property to the people. We need to be very careful about what we say in the office about our clients. So we're at our sales meeting and you're describing the listing that you have coming and you're talking about the property. And let's say I'm not a very good BIC, so I'm not paying attention. I'm going to go back here and get me a donut. And you keep talking. I just allow you to keep talking. So you've described the property in depth. And then all of a sudden you launch into, we're listing it for X amount, but I know my seller would be willing to take less than that. Did the conversation just switch gears? Did you just learn something about my seller in this transaction that could harm them if you bring the buyer? Because if you bring the buyer, you're going to say, I know this listing price, but I also know for a fact that the seller will be willing to accept less than that. You guys with me? So particularly with dual agency, here's the problem, you guys. Because you talked and I allowed you to talk, I didn't stop you from talking. Guess what? None of you that attended sales meeting this morning could ever be designated in that transaction because you now know something confidential about the other side. And remember, that's one of the caveats to designated dual agency. You cannot be designated if you know something confidential about the other side. So we can talk about the property all day long. Talk about the property. If you can see it on Zillow, describe it, talk about it to everybody you encounter. But we need to be really, really careful. We're talking about the people, particularly in my office. Understand, dual agency says that we can, right? Because dual agency, remember in dual, we are all straddling this wall. I got the buyer on one side, I got the seller on the other, and then straddling the wall is firm and all the agents in the firm. So technically we can, but just because we can, does that mean that we should? Because if we allow you to, I call it water cooler gossip. If we allow you to engage in this water cooler gossip, what I'm doing is preventing any of you from ever being designated. Does this make sense? I know we had a lot of questions last week about, well, how do you learn about the other side? How do you learn about the other side? It doesn't matter how you learn about the other side. Maybe you have a peer, maybe you have a coworker that blabs, that talks too much. Maybe they tell you their buyer has to buy within 6 weeks and they're moving here from another state and they're highly motivated. If you're working with the seller, didn't you just learn something about my buyer that could harm them? Because what are you supposed to tell your seller? 6 weeks, highly motivated, moving from another state, right? That's what we mean by this confidential information. And in just a bit, we're going to, again, talk about disclosure. And one thing, you guys may want to go ahead and jot this down. If your conversation switches gears from the property to the people, and remember, when we're talking about the people, it's got to be about this transaction. I think it's lovely if I knew where you grew up and what you do for a living and how many siblings you have, right? I'm talking about the people, but how does that relate to anything that we need to know about this transaction? We need to be on alert for PTM, price, term, and motive. PTM, price, term, and motive. Again, we're going to talk about disclosures in just a bit. So this is where we left off. And I'm at the bottom of page 163 now. And I like the bottom page. I mean, I like unit 7. There's some good stuff just in unit 7, but the bottom of 163 kind of gives us some nice bullet points to sum up, to wrap up dual and designated agency discussion. Remember, once the parties are designated, dual does not go away. Remember our wall. Buyers on one side, yeah. I thought I heard some sellers on the other. Firm and all the agents. This is what dual agency looks like. The only thing that happens in designated, one agent is kicked off the wall to work exclusively with the buyer, and a different agent is kicked off the wall to work exclusively with the seller. Check out where the firm and all the other agents are. Aren't they still straddling that wall? Aren't they still in dual agency? So when we go into designated dual agency, it's only 2 agents that are designated. Everybody else remains in dual. Dual does not go away. Designated is a form of dual agency, which means in order to have consent to designated, in order to have consent to do designated, we first have to get consent to do dual. You can't do designated without dual. The forms committee just updated our listing agreement last July, and they did a really good job of making that point clear for us. We'll see our forms again. If you didn't get a chance to look at it, we'll see our forms again when we get to Unit 8. And it's a really good understanding now that in order for us to do designated, we first have to have consent to do dual. Dual and designated are only possible with in-house transactions. How many firms? Everybody show me. How many firms? Only one. And that's what we mean by an in-house transaction. The firm is on both sides. Both sides are coming within the same house, within the same firm. Remember, you guys, a firm may have multiple locations. So if you join a big enough firm that has 5 locations and you are representing the seller and an agent from a different office location, but within the same firm is representing the buyer, we are still in dual because it's about the firm. And that's what we need to look at, is the big umbrella under the firm. We have to have written approval for both seller and buyer no later than the making of the first offer. We really need their permission to allow the showing, but we got to have it in writing no later than making the first offer. We're going to talk again today about the opportunity that we have to work with somebody under an oral agreement at first. But there is a period of time that we have to put that oral agreement in writing. And that is when we're ready to present the offer. And that also applies to dual agency. If we're designated, the two that are designated, the individual agents that are designated are going to now work exclusively, one for the seller and one for the buyer. Exclusivity comes back for the clients when we get into designated dual agency. Exclusivity comes back. We had it, we went into dual, it went away. We designated, it came back. They have that exclusive representation again. In order to do designated, the firm needs a policy in place. Again, I think we were all in agreement. I had 100% agreement last week. Dual's not what's best for the client. That's a fact. Dual is not as what is best for the client. But if we have the opportunity to bring designated in, then designated gets the client back to where they were. But I need you guys, because I know it's better and I know it sounds so much better. We need to make sure that we understand not all firms offer designated. This is not an automatic thing. It doesn't just happen. The firm has to have a policy in place about whether or not they will allow it. And if so, how are they going to practice it? How is that going to work? Question comes in, designated and exclusive are the same thing. As far as who's representing the client, in this case, because remember in dual agency, we're all straddling this wall. The buyers and sellers don't get that advocacy. They don't get that exclusive representation. We all represent the buyer and the seller in dual agency. When designated comes in, once these two agents have been kicked off the wall, the two agents may now proceed. They might as well be with two different firms. And that's what we mean by designated brings back exclusive representation, if I could clarify that. Exclusive representation comes back once we've been designated. You cannot be designated if you've already received prior confidential information about the other party. Maybe you know them, maybe you guys work together, or maybe you kids play together, or maybe your peer was running around the office blabbing their confidential information. Maybe at one point they were a former client of yours. How do you learn this confidential information? Doesn't matter. The point is if you know confidential, and your BIC should be looking at you saying, do you know anything about the other side that could harm them in this transaction? So if you're working with the seller, your BIC should make sure that you don't know anything about the buyer. If you're working with the buyer, your BIC should make sure that you don't know anything about the seller before you designate, before they designate. And then the last key point we have here, and again, you guys, the second bullet on this screen is probably one of the bigger problem topics in Unit 7. The provisional broker and the broker in charge cannot be designated opposite of each other. Please hear me. They can be in dual. When one of us are in dual, all of us are in dual. But the BIC and the PB cannot be designated. You cannot have a BIC designated to work exclusively with the buyer and a provisional broker designated to work exclusively with the seller. It's the very nature of their relationship. As a provisional broker, your BIC should be in your back pocket. They know what you're doing. They might have been with you on that listing appointment. At the very least, they were consulting you to get you ready. They talked to you afterwards. How did it go? If the BIC's doing their job, they know something confidential about the other party. Any other combination is allowed. as long as they haven't received confidential information about the other side. And that's the BIC's responsibility, to make sure that before you're designated. Final thoughts on dual or designated? Okay. The last type of agency relationship that we may have is agency relationships and rental agreements. Remember, I got a whole unit dedicated to the property manager. So we're going to hold off and have that conversation when we get to unit 12. Typically, in a rental situation, the owner of the property hires the property manager. Thus, the owner is the one represented. Tenants may have their own representation, but in a residential transaction, for the most part, they do not. And I think for the property manager, they got a really fine line to walk here, because in a property management situation, the landlord or the owner is their client. The landlord or the owner is the one that's in first class. The tenant's back here in coach. But think about let's say this tenant signs a year lease. When it comes time to pay rent every month, who is the tenant calling? Who is the tenant sending rent to? The agent, the property manager, right? If something breaks, who is the tenant calling? The agent, the property manager. The tenant is communicating sometimes on a regular basis with the property manager. And the property manager always needs to stop and ask themselves and remind themselves, who is my client? Who is in first class? Because everything that property manager does has got to be what's in the best interest for the owner or the landlord, not the tenant. Is it in the owner's best interest to collect rent? Is it in the owner's best interest to collect the money? Yeah. Is it in the owner's best interest to make sure any necessary repairs are made? Of course it is. And that's why the property manager does what they do. It's not for the tenant. It is for their owner, their client, the owner. Does that make sense? Again, we're going to spend more time in property management when we get into unit 12. So we've mentioned something this morning about where we were heading. And what we need to talk about now is our working with real estate agent disclosure. Now, Commission Rule 50A.0104, which is in the online learning system under the Campbell folder. 58A.0104 addresses our agency agreements and agency disclosure. Somebody says it's a hard read. Yeah, man. Good times, isn't it? Thank you for saying that. Break it up into chunks. Break it up into sections. It's not like reading the Sunday funnies, is it? So break it up into chunks. So we have something called the Working with Real Estate Agent Disclosure. And this is my opportunity to disclose to the consumer my agency status, where I stand in the transaction. It's my opportunity to warn them that I don't owe them confidentiality until they decide to hire me. Remember the C&O car, you don't get confidentiality if you don't hire me. Doesn't the consumer deserve to know that? Be very careful what you tell me, because I don't have to keep your secrets. Now, if you hire me, that's a different story. This is the first thing about the disclosure I need everybody to understand. The Working with Real Estate Agent Disclosure is not a client form. This is a consumer form. This is a form that we use for consumers before I ever have the conversation with you about whether or not you want to be my client or my customer. So our agency disclosure is a consumer form. Its whole purpose, the main purpose, is for the consumer to understand that I don't know you confidentiality. It's my opportunity. Remember our football analogy last week? It's my opportunity to tell them whose team I'm on. Am I on the seller's team or am I on the buyer's team? Guys, we can't assume that they know. Let's say I have a listing and I'm doing an open house on Sunday. And Julie Campbell promotes the open house. There's a sign, a for sale sign in the front yard with Julie Campbell's name on it. You come into my open house and I say, hi, I'm Julie Campbell, and I'm even wearing a name badge that says Julie Campbell. We see consistent here, right? Every time you see this property, anything about this property, you see Julie Campbell, Julie Campbell, Julie Campbell, Julie Campbell. I can't let the consumer assume that I work with the seller. I can't let the consumer come to that conclusion on their own, even though my name is attached to this listing all over the place. The consumer doesn't know the rules the way that you and I do. So we can never let the consumer assume. And this is what this disclosure does. Second bullet point is probably the biggest problem topic in this discussion. The working with real estate agent disclosure is required on all sales transactions. Y'all, please write this down. Residential sales and commercial sales. When we are talking about a sales transaction, it's when we're talking about working with buyers and sellers. The disclosure is not required when we're doing lease or rental transactions. When I'm doing rental transactions, I'm working with tenants and landlords, aren't I? Not required with lease. I'll tell you somewhere else where they may like to trick you guys. You may have an answer choice that says it's required in all real estate transactions. All real estate transactions is sale and lease. So it's not required for lease. It's not required for all. It is required for sales transactions. When we're meeting, forming relationships with buyers and sellers. The working with real estate agency disclosure does not create agency. The disclosure does not create agency. There's a place, and we're going to look at it in just a minute. We'll look at the form. There's a residential sales and commercial sales, all sales transactions. Residential sales is sales, commercial sales is sales. There's a place on the disclosure for the consumer to sign. The disclosure is also pretty clear that it says this is not a contract. The consumer is not signing to create agency. The consumer is signing, acknowledging receipt. The consumer is signing, saying that you've had this conversation with them and they received the disclosure. Although it is required in all sales transactions, does everybody have that written down real big? Sales transactions, working with buyers and sellers. Although it is required in all sales transactions, not all consumers may get the working with real estate agent disclosure from me. There's a certain point in time in which triggers me to make sure I've done the disclosure. And that certain point in time is referred to as first substantial contact. Why don't you guys, in a private chat, let's do a private chat. Let's break this down. What do you think of, in as few words as you can, when you see the word substantial? What does substantial mean to you? I'm seeing some of you come in. A couple of you say an important, meaningful, big. Before any personal stuff is told. Yes, guys, you could come into my open house. We could chit chat about the weather. Are you happy to see the sun today? Did I just learn anything substantial about you, about this transaction? About that, remember, it's always about this transaction. You could come into my open house and say, we could talk about the weather. We could talk about where you were before you came to my open house, where you're leaving. We could talk about whatever we want to about you, as long as that conversation doesn't switch gears to PTM. Once I start learning about or asking the consumer questions about their price, term, or motive, for buyers, how high are they willing to go? For sellers, how low are they willing to accept? Acceptable terms. When do you want to close, for example? Or your motive for buying or selling. When that conversation switches gears about the people to something substantial, if we haven't already done our working with real estate agent disclosure yet, then we need to, once we've hit this PTM, in some cases, we may need to interrupt them. We may need to say, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but I need to let you know that I represent the seller in this transaction. And anything you tell me, I have the right to take back to my seller. That's what they hired me for. As a consumer, don't you think that's fair? Don't you think it's fair I kind of give you that warning? I say, careful what you say. Or would you rather I just keep talking? Just keep allowing you to talk and share all your PTM with me, everything I needed. And they say, okay, well, you need to know I need to share that with my seller. Would you be upset as a consumer? Absolutely. Guys, please remember the Real Estate Commission's main purpose is to do what? Protect the public. Isn't the consumer the public? Isn't the consumer the person that the commission's trying to protect? So first substantial contact, I'm getting a couple questions in. First substantial contact, as I alluded to, may happen face-to-face. It may happen when you come into my open house. It may happen when I meet you for a listing appointment or a buyer consultation appointment. But first substantial contact could also happen over the phone. It could happen in an email. Y'all, I'm telling you right now, people talk. And people love to talk about themselves. Have y'all ever been in a store and have a total stranger come up to you and start sharing their life story? Once they find out you're in real estate, people love to talk about real estate. And once they find out, oh my goodness, maybe you're in the grocery store with your name tag on. Are you inviting people to talk to you about real estate if you're in Harris Teeter with your name tag? If they know, they may strike up a conversation. But they can also do that via email, phone call. It does not have to be face-to-face. In other words, what I'm telling you is when we are with the consumer, we need to be on alert for this first substantial contact. And we need to, once we've hit it, we need to say, I'm so sorry. Here's the deal. Commission rule says that we got to do the working with real estate agent disclosure no later than first substantial contact. I think in a perfect world, we could always do our disclosure no later than first substantial contact. Do we live in a perfect world? No. Which is why we need to be on alert. If you feel like the conversation is getting ready to switch gears, If you're meeting with a buyer, potential seller for the first time, there's a really good chance that the conversation may turn to price, term, and motive. Go ahead and get it out of the way. But we've got to do it at this time of first substantial contact. We've seen enough TV shows and movies. I know none of us know this from personal experience, but we've seen enough TV shows to know what the Miranda rights are. What do the Miranda rights say in part? Anything you say can be held against you. In a sense, we're Mirandaizing the consumers. We're letting them know what you tell me, I have a duty to take back to my client. I had a listing once, and we have of course, a team phone number, and we all take turns, or used to take turns answering that team phone number. So one of my teammates got a call off of my listing, and she answered the phone, you know, hello, thank you for calling. How may I help you? And the person on the other end of the line said, I'm calling about your listing at 123 Main Street, and I'm pre-approved for XML. Did we just learn something about their price term? Or yeah, I didn't even know this person's name yet. But within one sentence of that phone call, we hit first substantial contact. This is people. This is working with the public. Anybody ever worked in retail or restaurant? Anybody ever worked directly with the public? They're a good time, aren't they? If you haven't, at least you've been out with the public before. We know people. And this is us dealing with people, and this is us giving them the opportunity to understand, again, where I stand in this transaction. Careful what you tell me, because I have a duty to take it back to my client. That's why they hired me. And if you want that confidentiality, the only way you're going to get that confidentiality is if you hire me. So this is always going to happen when people don't know. They start speaking a lot of personal stuff after they say they want to buy a house. Again, they can talk about buying a house. They can talk about liking the kitchen, and they can talk about, you know, needing shelf space or whatever, right? It's the price, term, or motive is what we've got to be on lookout for. Everybody's going to tell you they want to buy or sell. I'll tell you that right now. Everybody out there, once they find out you're in real estate, they're like, oh, I was thinking about buying one day, or oh, I was thinking about selling one day. It doesn't tell me anything. Do we hear the difference in I was thinking about buying versus I have to buy within the next 6 months? Do we hear a difference? And everybody's going to tell you they want to do something in real estate. Everybody. So just because you say you're thinking about buying one day, well, we haven't gone anywhere yet. So again, I'm doing an open house on Sunday. You walk into my open house, it doesn't mean I'm going to bombard you with a form. Hi, welcome to my open house. I need to do this. I need to give and review this working with real estate agent disclosure. But I do need to be on alert to make sure that our conversation does not switch gears and I start learning about or asking about the consumer's price, term, or motive. So with first substantial contact, we need to disclose our agency to status before that conversation switches gears. And in the case of my teammate, when the conversation switched gears, as soon as it started, she stopped her. She said, ma'am, I appreciate you calling, and I appreciate you sharing with me. But you need to understand we represent the seller. And what you share with us, we need to take back to the seller. And you know what that lady on the phone then told my teammate? She said, you are the third real estate company I've called, and nobody has told me that. This is what I know, you guys. Agents across the state do not do working with real estate agent disclosure properly. Some of you like to get really upset in this discussion. I bought a house and they never did disclosure. I sold my house and they never did disclosure. I'm telling you right now, agents across the state are not doing it right. What do you think the Real Estate Commission thinks about that? Oh, well, if the majority are doing it wrong, then it's okay. Yeah, no, so I got some thumbs downs from you guys. That's exactly what the commission thinks. This is one of these things that is not a problem, until it's a problem. And then it becomes a problem. Remember, we talked about that letter of inquiry? You don't have the disclosure, or better yet, you know, maybe they do a deeper dive and they say, well, send me everything. You know, we wanted paperwork on this transaction that we got the complaint, but it's kind of like the IRS. Once they open that door, then they may say, well, send me everything, all your transactions for the last year. And if you don't have these disclosures, you violated a commission rule, 58A.0104. There was a story going around a couple years ago. One of the commissioners, a daggum commissioner, he and his wife were out open housing one Sunday. They were legitimately interested in buying a home, and they were out looking at open houses. And they went into one open house and they had struck up a conversation with the agent. And the commissioner felt that that conversation had switched gears from the property to first substantial contact. And the commissioner said, do you have anything you need to go over with me? And the agent said, And the commissioner said, no kind of disclosure or anything you need to give me? And the agent said, nope. And the commissioner said, nothing we need to discuss, nothing about, you know, confidentiality. No, he gave her 3 opportunities. And guys, he wasn't a secret shopper. It's not like he was out trying to catch her. He was legitimately looking for a house. 3 opportunities to say, oh yeah, I got to do this disclosure. What do you think she said when he told her who he was? She probably uttered some 4-letter words, didn't she? To start. So with first substantial contact, as we said, if it happens in person, then we carry these things in our trunk. I mean, we can pull them up, should be able to pull them up on your phones once you get affiliated with your phones. I keep copies of these things in my trunk. So if first substantial contact ever happens in person, please stop talking. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. You need to understand where I stand in this transaction. You need to understand that I don't owe you confidentiality. If first substantial contact happens either the phone or electronic means, maybe an email, or maybe they send you a message off of your website, for example, just because we're not face to face doesn't mean I don't have the duty to still discuss it with them. But now I'm not face to face, so I can't hand it to them. So commission rule says I still discuss it, but now I have no later than 3 days to send it to them. So let's see, what about when you say, even if you have your name and sign on the property, doesn't mean you represent the seller. What you say, disclose, well, if I have my sign, if there's a for sale sign in the front yard of the property and my name's on it, the seller has to be represented by the firm. I can't do a single service for the firm, for the seller, excuse me, without having that agency agreement. So if I have a sign in the yard, if I have my name to that property, I'm representing the seller, and that's what we need to let the consumer know. Shake your head, yes or no. Can I make anybody do anything? I've yet to figure out how. I'm still trying, but yeah, I've yet to figure out how, right? So guys, consumers a lot of times are hesitant, they're cautious. They, you know, come in kind of leery of us because we have the stigma of being hardcore salespeople. You know, have you ever been accosted by a salesperson? And sometimes people think that way about real estate agents. We have the conversation, we hand them the form, and they refuse to sign it. Please understand, my job is to explain agency to them. It's not to force them to sign. It's not to put the pen in their hand and say, you will sign this form. If they refuse to sign, then I write that on the form. If you know their name, great. Bobby refused to sign January, whatever, 24th. We have to acknowledge that we tried. I can't make them do anything. Remember, I'm not creating agency. I'm disclosing it. Does everybody hear the difference? Creating agency is using our agency agreement. Disclosing agency is telling you where I stand in the transaction. And I think the interrupting them part, I mean, I don't know what kind of house you were raised in, but I'm going to tell you guys, I was raised in the house that it was rude to interrupt people. Anybody else similar? It's rude to interrupt people when they're talking. Guess what, y'all? In this case, mama's wrong. It's rude to not interrupt. Y'all don't tell my mom I said that. It's rude not to interrupt them. It's rude to keep them, let them keep talking and then say, great, everything you just told me about your price, term, and motive, I'm going to take back to my seller. Have a nice day. Thank you guys for coming to my open house. How do they feel about the home? You, real estate in general, not real good, do they? Now, what if you come into my open house? I feel like the conversation is getting ready to get towards this first substantial contact. I do my disclosure. I have the conversation. I explain it to you. I talk about not owing you confidentiality, and you sign it. And then you say, anyway, as I was saying, we got to buy within 6 months, and this is our price point, and these are acceptable terms, da 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 da. Once I've done my job and disclosed it, I'm done. At that point, I need to get out my notepad and my pen and start taking notes, because I have to take that back to my seller. And I told them I had to do this. So once I've done my job and explained it, if they insist on keep, you may want to say, did you not just hear what I just said? Yeah, whatever. So anyway, as I was saying, right? Do people get stubborn sometimes? Again, we know the public, we know people. Always remember who you represent. So let's see, in the example where the lady called, let you guys know how much she got pre-qualified for. Did you pass the info to the seller about how much she was pre-approved, or you don't pass it because you didn't know before you explained it? That lady did not make an offer, but had she made an offer less than asking price, I would have a duty to tell my seller, I know she's pre-approved for X amount. Now, does that mean that's what she's willing to pay, what she's pre-approved for? Not necessarily, but I know how much the lender said she can afford. Does that make sense? So she never brought an offer. I hope the next firm she called, though, she at least my teammate helped her better understand that. I still don't know her name. We never heard from her again. And that's the way the consumers are. Some consumers will turn into your customer. Some consumers will turn into your client. Some consumers you're never going to see again as long as you live. And that, when the commission is looking for the disclosures, not all consumers turn into clients. So if only the disclosures you also have agency agreements attached to it, isn't the commission going to have a flag go up? Aren't they going to say, are you serious? Everybody you've ever talked to hired you? Well, dang, they're going to call you and ask you for advice then, aren't they? Because you're doing something that others aren't. Keep all records. I have a folder in my .loop. We use .loop, my firm. And I have a folder called Working with Real Estate Agent Disclosure 2023, which means every single disclosure I get signed this year is going to go in that folder. And maybe some of those I'll be able to copy and paste into the transaction file because I was hired. Maybe they won't. You guys with me? It's not a matter of whether or not you're going to hire me or not, whatever. You just met me. We may not be that far yet. It's a consumer disclosure. Anybody remember, and you can show me, anybody remember last week we said how many years we have to keep all of our records? Does anybody remember how many years we have to keep records? Yep, and I'm seeing you guys. So how long do I keep my Working with Real Estate Agent disclosure? I keep everything for 3 years. Again, that's covered under this commission rule. It's just here for reference. The license law and commission rule I really, really want you guys to read for now are in the Campbell folder in the online learning system. You're welcome to look this up if you want to. Here's your reference. We've always got to be on alert. My husband calls me a traveling billboard. Why does he call me that? If you ever get behind me at a stoplight, you will know it's me. My back windshield has the name of my firm, my name, the fact that I'm a real estate professional, my phone number, and my email address. If I'm in my vehicle, am I not inviting people to come up and talk to me about real estate? If I'm at the drive-through at McDonald's, don't I need to be on alert for first substantial? Because I'm putting myself out there as a real estate professional. I'm letting the world know I am a real estate. Call me about real estate. So if in my car, I mean, anytime you're acting, say in the capacity of an agent, we need to be on alert. Let's go back to the grocery store. You wear your name badge everywhere you go in public. Why? Because you want people to strike up conversations about real estate. So you're in the grocery store today after work, and you're in the cereal aisle, and you're trying to decide what kind of cereal you want this week. And somebody walks by you and they see your name badge. And they say, ooh, you're in real estate. Well, I was thinking about buying a house one. Do you need to be on it? Now, just because we strike up a conversation in the cereal aisle doesn't mean I need to say, stop talking. But don't you need to be on alert? Don't you need to be aware? Because that conversation standing in front of Captain Crunch could easily turn into, this is how much I want to buy. These are the terms that I want to buy under, or this is my motive for buying. Same thing with sellers. We always have to be on alert. We may have to say, I don't have the form in my purse, obviously, right? It's not my back pocket. So we may have to, try to get contact information so we can keep this conversation going. Hey, you want to run out with me to the parking lot real quick? I got a form to go over with you, right? We may have to just make that, swap business cards, right? Again, obviously, I don't have a disclosure with me in my back pocket at all times, but I need to be on alert so I can at least warn them, so I can at least caution them. The commission then goes on to say, once we've done our disclosure, the commission says at that point, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. Again, before I start asking you a bunch of questions about your buying or selling needs, haven't we already decided that customers and clients get two levels of services? So how do I know if I'm going to put you in my first class or my coach if we don't have this conversation early on? We're going to talk in just a bit about switching people from first class to coach and vice versa. Again, in a perfect world, first substantial contact is going to happen before, disclosure is going to happen before first substantial contact. We're going to talk about some oral agency in just a bit as well. So bear with me. Questions so far on our disclosure? Okay. We got more to say, so let's take a break. We come back, we're going to look at the form. So Did you guys hear the alarm this time? Yay. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I fixed it. I'm hoping that helps us, because you should be able to hear that thing anywhere in the house, right? If you're unloading your dishwasher, oh no, class is back on, and you come a running, right? Okay. All right. So we are back, and I am taking attendance. And what I would like to do is actually look at the form. We don't study many forms in this class. So when we're looking at a form together in class, what does this mean? Yeah, kind of important, right? You're going to learn more forms when you get to post-licensing. You're going to learn more forms when you get out in the real world. We're just kind of gradually easing you in. By the way, I have taken attendance, so if you will let me know you're back in the chat, so we can make sure to count you here. So you guys have, it's the same thing. It's actually an up-to-date copy. This doesn't happen often, but you guys have this in your book. I think it starts on page 167. I also have it here for you in the online learning system in Unit 7. So either one you want to look at. So we can all see it together. We're going to look at the version in the online learning system, again, under Unit 7. And if you're in your book, you got 167 and 168. It's not a 2-page form. It's a 1-page form. We have a form, everybody see this, for sellers. And then I have another one for buyers. Remember, these are sales forms. We're not talking about tenants and landlords here, are we? We're talking about who does sales? Buyers and sellers. So the form starts by telling us, can everybody see this? Okay, on my screen, everybody good? Okay. What is the very first thing this form says? It is required for all what? Sales transactions, including residential or commercial. Right there at the gate. If you read this form, you know we're just dealing with sales transactions. We're not dealing with lease transactions. We're not dealing with every single type of real estate transaction, just sales. So it starts, and again, it's the same. We're just going to go over the sellers together, but you guys also have the buyers, and it's the same. It's just, who we're talking to here, right? So it starts with a box called important. And the very first sentence in here is what? This form is not a contract. All it is a disclosure. And when you sign, you're just signing that you've received it. I'm not creating agency. I haven't really tried to create agency yet. I'm just trying to get you to stop talking. I'm trying to protect you, the consumer, and get you to stop talking. So then we told him it's not a contract. In real estate sales transactions, it's important that you understand whether an agent represents you. I'm not telling you if I represent you. I'm not telling you if somebody else represents you. I'm telling you up front, does anybody represent you? An agent represent you in this transaction? Agents are required to review this form with you at first substantial contact before asking for or receiving your confidential information. Agents are also required to give you a copy of the form after you sign it. This is for what? This is the consumer's protection. Always remember the Real Estate Commission's #1 purpose is to protect them when they're talking with us. Everybody see why we have this form? It gives us an opportunity to say, this is what this means to you. I love this third bullet point. It does not get much clearer than this. Do not share any confidential information with an agent or assume that the agent is acting on your best behalf until you have entered into a written agency agreement with the agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with others. Remember what we said last week? I used to do new agent training, and hands down, the #1 question I got from newly licensed agents was, I don't know what to say. And one suggestion I had for you guys was to let you put the the words from the form, or put the form and words in your mouth. Is this not pretty clear? Don't you tell me anything confidential, because if you, until you decide to hire an agent, they don't owe you that confidentiality. So being familiar with the forms can help us better have these conversations with the consumer. And that'll come in time. Y'all, the first time you do this disclosure, it's going to be bumpy and awkward. You're going to be something like, well, I disclose, sign here, right? I promise you, once you practice, you get your elevator speech down, the more and more you do, I promise you, it's going to be like second nature to you. One thing I always hated when I was in sales, hated doing role playing. I always felt so dumb standing in front of the class, in front of people, and acting like the seller walking into an open house. But you know what? It works, because it gives you that opportunity to have these conversations, see these scenarios. And that's hopefully something your firm will guide you through. Maybe not necessarily role playing, but at least help guide you through it. So we start with this big important. And then we're note to agent, this is for us, check all relationship types that may apply, that may below that may apply. There it is to this seller. And then you see here, we have seller's agency where you can act as a listing agent. We have dual agent, we have designated dual agent. And then we have a buyer agent working with an unrepresented seller. That unrepresented seller is otherwise known as a for sale by owner. Because this form is not a contract, I'm not checking the box in which we're going to work. Think of this section as a menu. The firm is telling the consumer, these are the products that we offer. Does your firm offer seller's agency? Does your firm offer dual agency, designated dual agency, or do they allow you to work with an unrepresented seller? If they do, then you're going to do all four. But this is not the consumer saying, this is not the consumer checking this. This is not the consumer saying, okay, I want to do dual agency and I want to do this, and I want to do that. This is the agent saying, these are the products we have to offer. So if your firm does not offer designated dual agency, then you don't get to check this box. We're telling the consumer the menu of items that they have to choose from. Think about when you go to dinner tonight and you look at the menu. As much fun as it seems, are we really going to order one of everything? Probably not, right? It'd be fun. I'll go with you. It'd be a good time. We could do this, but you're probably not going to order one of everything. All we're doing, the firm, the agent, is presenting their options. We'll discuss in just a minute how we're going to proceed, what that relationship looks. Does that make sense? Think of this as a menu. This is the firm's offering. Note to seller, for more information about the duties, refer to the Real Estate Commission's question and answer on working with real estate agent. We'll see that next. Or ask an agent for a copy of it. So if you don't provide it, they're telling the consumer it's out there. Let's help them get their hands on it. It further explains agency. You have a place for the seller to sign, 2 places, seller signature. If there's more than 2, we can do additional signatures page. The agent's name, agent's license number, and the firm name. The agent doesn't have to sign it. We're not creating agency. This is not a contract. I'm just disclosing my status to you. And again, all the consumer is signing means that you have received it. Once you guys get your license, you're going to get a 6-digit license number. Go ahead and memorize that thing, because you're going to need it everywhere you go. General rule of thumb, as a real estate agent, when you sign your name, you get to put your license number on it too. So as soon as you get that piece of paper with that license, put it on a flashcard if you have to, but go ahead and memorize that thing. And then we go through again with the buyers, the same important. I don't owe you confidentiality. This is not a contract. Again, the menu item of the buyers, let's make that where we can see it. Does the firm offer buyer agency, dual agency, designated agency, or do they allow the option to work with an unrepresented buyer, which would make you a seller subagent? Again, we're providing a menu to the consumers, letting them know that these are the products that we have to offer. Are we going to proceed into a buyer agency agreement? I got a form for that. Are you going to allow dual agency? I got a form for that. We're going to use that when we create the agency agreements, not disclosing our status. Buyer signatures, agent's name, license number, and firm name. We need to give them a copy, make sure we get a copy of this into their hands. And we also need to keep a copy for our records. As you guys reminded me, keep everything for 3 years. What questions do I have on this disclosure? Okay. The other thing you guys have in your book, I think it starts on 169. You have this Q&A brochure. The brochure is actually a brochure, but they provide us with a PDF copy. So what you're looking at is just the PDF version, but also know that there's a nice, pretty glossy brochure out there that we can provide. Or if you're frugal like me, you can get the free PDF download. Commission doesn't care if you pay money for the brochure, if you do the free download. Commission just says, get this in their hands. So when we're explaining agency, when we're going over our working with real estate agent disclosure, at that time, it is recommended that you accompany it with this Q&A brochure. And I think you guys should read this. I think as part of your homework assignment this week, if you haven't already, I think you guys should sit down and read this, because it's us explaining agency to the consumer. And as you guys are trying to wrap your brains around agency, it's going to help you better understand. It's also going to help you put words in your mouth. This Q&A brochure can kind of be broken down into a couple different sections. Again, I'm going to let you guys read this. We're going to first start telling the consumer about what does the word agency mean? What the heck does all this mean to begin with? What is an agency agreement? Various terms about the agency agreement. And then the form launches into a Q&A directly geared towards the sellers. So if you're meeting potential sellers for the first time, you can direct them to this section. You can say, this is about you, and these are questions that you may have. Then we have a little section, Q&As, if you're working specifically with potential buyers. We can direct them to these little sections to help them understand what it means for them. For you guys, it goes over working with sellers. It goes over working with buyers. It helps us better understand that. The last little section is our termination of agency agreements. So in this brochure, we're giving the consumer, we've talked about how we create agency. We talked about what it means for the seller. We talked about what it means for the buyer. And then we talk about how it ends. This is really an informational piece for the consumer to help them understand. And they're acknowledging that they received it. It's a nice piece. If you look at the brochure, there's a set of pictures, which I have on the next slide. They're not in the PDF, and that, to me, that's the downfall of the PDF. But they just updated this thing July of 21. Yeah, July of 21. And when they updated the Q&A brochure, they added the pictures. The whole disclosure, the whole brochure was definitely an upgrade from what we had before. Anywhere across the state of North Carolina, July 1st, 2021, you could have heard a woohoo. And what that woohoo was, that was all of us agents across the state with our new disclosure and our new Q&A brochure, much better than what it used to be. Use these forms to help you put words in your mouth. Be familiar with the forms so you can understand them. Guys, it's soon going to be your job to explain agency to the buyers and sellers. We need to have a good understanding about it. Remember what we said on day one when we were talking about our different colored stars? Green star is basic recall. You know what it means. Yellow star is a little further knowledge. Red star, you need to be able to explain it to somebody in a way that they understand. And I don't know if you've noticed, but once we got into Unit 7, we started seeing a bunch of red stars, didn't we? So one thing you guys may want to consider doing your disclosure with your family and friends. If you can explain agency disclosure to your family in a way that they understand it, then you have that red level knowledge. Does that make sense? Please don't just read the book and say, yeah, I got this. If you can have a conversation with your family and friends in a way that they understand it, if you have this conversation with you and you go, what? I have no idea what you said. You need to go back to the book and study agency more. Everybody with me? Anybody's family and friends already helping them through this class? Yeah, lots of you. Get the rest of them on board. This is what I know about real estate. It's not an individual person's career choice. In real estate, the whole family is involved. I don't know if you guys know this, but we typically don't work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You may be out in the evening showing property. You may be doing an open house smack dab in the middle of the day on a Sunday. I'm not saying you're never going to have family time again, but you guys have got to find that balance, and you got to get your family on board so they can support you and they can help you. And honestly, I think it starts here. So I like seeing so many of those hands with your family supporting you and helping you. You can't have enough support. Questions on our disclosure? I mentioned the pictures that are in the brochure now. So I just copy and paste them and put them here. But again, I like the pictures because it gives us the illustration. Up here on the top left, you have buyer agency and seller agency. You see broker A and broker B are two different colors. That means they're with two different firms. So when we have typical buyer agency, typical seller agency, broker A is holding the buyer's hand, broker B is holding the seller's hand. If we go into dual agency, now how many colors do we have? How many firms do we have? Just one, right? You see how the agents are holding hands? They're holding hands with their buyers and sellers. They're helping them through the transaction, but the two agents in dual agency are holding hands. This is an example of dual agency with two agents. This is an example of dual agency with one. And then we may take this a step further and offer designated dual agency. How many firms do I have here? How many colors do I have? I still just have one, but look, they dropped hands. They're not holding hands anymore. Who are they hanging on to now? Their buyer or their seller. I love pictures. And I love that the commission put these in because I think the pictures help illustrate that. So as you guys are going through Unit 7, again, this is in the hard brochure, but the flat PDF doesn't have these pictures. I don't know why. So I want to make sure I give them to you guys because I really do think the pictures help. Questions or comments? Point of clarification. Again, this is all Rule A.0104. If you've read it or if you're starting to read it, remember what I said, read it, get through it. The second time you read it, it'll be much easier than the first time. The third time you read it, it'll be much easier than the second time. So please make sure you're spending time with 58A.0104 I had somebody on the call in the chat this morning say this is a hard read, and I really appreciate you saying that. Because if you read a first couple sentences and you don't know what it means, maybe you put it down and come back to it, right? Don't try to do it in one setting. 58A.0104 kind of tells us some particulars. They break down this idea of disclosure. So when you're working with a prospective buyer or seller, we have to disclose at first substantial contact. This is the consumer piece of that. Please write that down on the first bullet point. This is the consumer piece of it. First time you encounter a prospective buyer or seller, before we hit first substantial contact, but then they say, well, what if you're already hired as a seller's agent or sub-agent and you're communicating with the buyer agent the first time? We're still going to do our disclosure at first substantial contact. The second bullet point is the example of you coming into my open house. I've already been hired. I'm already acting as a seller's agent. You come into the open house, just because you walk in the front door of my open house does not mean I need to drop the disclosure on you. I need to be on alert. We can talk about the weather. We can talk about what you have for lunch. We can talk about anything we want as long as we don't hit that first substantial contact. But what if you're already hired as a buyer's agent? And as a buyer's agent, you're communicating with the seller or the seller agent for the first time. At that point, commission rule says that we need to disclose my status of being a buyer's agent. Obviously, if I'm talking to other agents, I'm not going to do the disclosure, but they still have the right to know that I've already been hired. I'm already employed as a buyer's agent. And in that case, I need to say I'm a buyer's agent at initial contact. So let's make sure we understand the difference between first substantial contact and initial contact. First substantial contact is when the conversation switches gears towards the people's price, term, or motive as it relates to this transaction. Initial contact is, hi, my name is Julie. The very first time you meet me, if you're a seller or a seller's agent, I have got to disclose that I'm working with a buyer. I have got to disclose that I'm a buyer's agent. So let's say you're a buyer's agent and you've been working with buyers, they hired you, and you've been working with buyers for a period of time. And a new listing comes on the market today that they're interested in. And they call you and they say, we want to go see this new listing at 456 Elm Street. You say, great. And they say, but before we go, we have a couple questions. Can you help us get some questions answered? Of course I am. I'm your agent. That's what I do. So I pick up the phone and I call the seller's agent. Or if it's a for sale by owner, I contact the seller directly. Everybody with me? I'm calling this side, either the seller's agent, or in the case of a FSBO, there is no agent. So I'm contacting the seller. Person on the other end of the phone picks up and says, hello, thank you for calling. How may I help you? I say, my name is Julie Campbell, and I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your listing at 456 Elm Street. When did I disclose the status that I'm working with a buyer? That came out of my mouth right after my name. Initial contact. Same buyer hired you, you're still a buyer's agent, you have that agency agreement. Something comes on the market this afternoon, buyer wants to go see it, and they don't have questions. They just want to run out and see it at 2 o'clock. Most MLSs across the state, we used a centralized showing system, which means I can just log on to one place and schedule all my showings. I don't have to call every different firm, right? So it's a centralized showing, pretty cool. I just log on and schedule all my showings. When I'm scheduling showings, I have to identify my role. Am I scheduling this showing as a buyer's agent or a seller sub-agent? So if I'm scheduling this showing as a buyer's agent, what's going to happen? I submit the request for the showing. The request goes to the seller's agent and the seller. Everybody gets an email or a text, whatever they set up as their preference. Everybody gets communication. They get alerted of the fact that Julie Campbell, comma, buyer's agent, comma, wants to show your property at 2 o'clock today. When did you learn I was a buyer's agent? At initial contact. Whatever, is it email, is it phone call? Doesn't matter. Whenever you touch somebody for the first time as a buyer's agent, then we've got to disclose the fact that that buyer's already hired us. When we look at Unit 10, we're going to look at our standard offer to purchase and contract, look at some of our contract forms. And I don't sign the contract. I'm not a party to the contract. Buyers and sellers are parties to the contract. So I don't get to sign the contract. However, there is a place in the contract for me to put my name if I'm working with either party and to identify my role. Because commission rule says I've got to have my role in writing before I present the offer. So once again, thank you Forms Committee for allowing me, they're check marks. All you have to do is go through and say, I'm a buyer's agent, or I'm a seller's agent. Are you a seller sub-agent? Whatever your role is, it's right there on the contract for us. So we'll kind of get to revisit this a little bit when we get to Unit 10. I know some of you are starting to read the comments. We talked about license law and rule comments. Guess something else that the comments talk about. Agency agreements, agency disclosure. We've given you guys several different resources, several different opportunities. How many started on those comments? Couple hands? Okay. By the way, while I'm thinking about it, remember we told you you're not going to look at these comments in Appendix A because Appendix A is out of date. However, it was brought to my attention this weekend, and I appreciate this. At the back of Appendix A is a quiz. It starts on page 737. Just jot that down, please, in your margin. 737. I do think the quiz for license law and commission rule is good. You may have a question, but I think for the most part, that's a good quiz, 737. So ignore Appendix A, but don't ignore the quiz at the end of Appendix A. All right, one more thing to say about disclosure. It's kind of an exception, but here's the deal, you guys. When we talk about sales, I want you to pretend that auction sales don't even exist. I want you to put auction sales in their whole different category, put them in their own different bucket. This is important. The only time you need to worry about auction sales for your exams is when you're specifically asked a question about an auction sale. If the question doesn't mention auctions, then pretend that auctions don't exist. Everybody with me? The only time you worry your little self about auctions is if the question says something about an auction. And the reason why, because these things are different, they're just handled totally different. Anybody ever been to a real estate auction? A couple of you? I want to go. I just want to go kind of hang out in the front yard and watch. Maybe one day we can all do that. But auction sales are just handled different than a traditional sale. Working with real estate agent disclosure is not required in auction sales. If the buyer in the auction is represented, then the buyer's agent has to do the disclosure. So what we're saying is that in auction sales, the seller's agent doesn't have to disclose to the buyer. For some reason in an auction, it is just presumed that we all know that the auctioneer represents the seller. So did everybody hear what I said? I think this is worth me saying again. Pretend that auctions don't even exist. Pretend that they're not even a thing. unless you're specifically asked about it. Then we're going to mention it here. We're going to briefly mention it in Unit 10, and that's all we're going to say about options. Obviously not the focus of this class. Questions? All right. Getting off a disclosure, something else that we need to talk about, which again, this whole thing tends to be a problem topic. So we're going to spend some time on this. On page 174, we start talking about something called oral buyer agency. Before you start writing, hang on, I got you plenty of time, plenty of time. Before you guys start writing, why don't you all tell me in a private chat, if I'm offering, well, first off, let me say this. Oral buyer agency is a form of buyer agency. Does everybody see that? Oral buyer agency is a form of buyer agency. If I am offering somebody buyer's agency, if I am acting as a buyer's agent, tell me in a chat in 2 words, what do I owe that buyer? What duties do I owe that buyer? What responsibilities do I owe that buyer? An oral buyer agency, what do I owe that buyer? Oral buyer agency. I'm acting as a buyer's agent. If I'm acting as a buyer's agent, what do I owe my buyer? Duties, I should say, do I owe my buyer? In an oral buyer agency agreement, I owe them OCAR. Please hear me. Oral buyer agency is buyer agency. Oral buyer agency is buyer's agency. And under an oral buyer agency agreement, I owe this buyer OCAR. We don't have anything in writing yet, but guess what? The agreement is express. Remember what we said about express agreements. The terms have been clearly stated. In an oral buyer agency agreement, can I just start acting like your agent? I'm not going to ask you to sign anything, but I'm just going to start acting like your agent without any conversation about it whatsoever. No, that's implied. It's implied that I'm your agent. So how do we act in an oral buyer agency agreement? It's express. Even though it's not in writing yet, the terms have been clearly stated. Guys, here's the deal. We cannot perform a single service for the owner of a property until we have a written agency agreement. I cannot do anything for a seller. I cannot do anything for an owner landlord. We cannot do anything with the owner of a property without a written agreement. Commission rule does allow me to work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first. Buyers tend to be like these scared, timid little creatures that scare easily. They're going to run away, afraid. And the commission allows us to have this oral buyer agency agreement at first to help build their trust, to help form our relationship, to give us time to build that relationship. So it's an express agreement. We can work in this oral buyer agency agreement at first, but I have to put it in writing no later than I'm ready to present an offer on my buyer's behalf. I can show them property. I can ask them all sorts of questions about what are you looking for, how much you're willing to spend, what do you want to do? We've done our disclosure. I created agency because we had the conversation. We just haven't put it in writing yet. I can even help you write the offer. I can ask you how much do you want to offer and when do you want to close and fill in the blanks. But before I can present an agreement on a buyer's behalf, I've got to put that buyer agency agreement in writing. So if I owe them old car, it's still a buyer agency agreement. And if I owe them old car, what do you think they owe me? I see some head shaking no, and I agree with you. In an oral agreement, they owe me nothing. This is the laws of agency coming out. This is protecting the public. One thing that our written agency agreements discuss is my compensation. So under an oral agreement, they don't owe me anything. But I'm getting it in writing before I present it on their behalf. You guys with me? We got to get it in writing to officially form that relationship. If nothing else, it protects your commission. If that doesn't resonate to you, it protects your commission. We cannot demand commission from somebody unless we have a written agreement. So we got to, it's express, which means the terms are clearly stated. We got to put it in writing before we can present the offer on their behalf. Again, some of you like to get really upset about this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to work with a buyer until they sign an agency agreement. You may join a firm that has a policy that says we're not going to work with any buyers if they don't sign the agency agreement. Once again, I remind you, your test is not going to ask you what you're going to choose to do or what type of firm you're going to affiliate with. Your test is going to ask you what you can do. Shake your head, yes or no. Can you work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first? Can you? Yes. Are you going to? I don't care. We'll talk about that after you get your license. Make those decisions later. Right now, we're just focusing on the can, the license, law, and commission. Okay. Couple caveats with oral buyer agency. In oral buyer agency, I cannot demand exclusivity. Remember when we're talking about agency and we're talking about exclusive. How many firms in an exclusive relationship, how many firms can the buyer date? In an exclusive relationship, just one. How many firms can the buyer date in a non-exclusive relationship? Now the buyer's out there playing the field, aren't they? The buyer's out there dating many different firms. We cannot demand exclusivity in an oral agreement. If you look at that buyer and say, you're going to work with my firm and my firm only, then you need to get this oral agreement in writing. We cannot demand exclusivity. I have known buyers to call like 3 or 4 agents and basically say, this is what I'm looking for. The first one to find it wins. They can date as many firms as they want to. They can have as many firms out there working for them. We cannot demand exclusivity. The other thing that our oral buyer agency can't be is for a specified period of time. I cannot look at that oral buyer and say, you're going to work with me for 2 weeks or 2 months, however long. If I want to put an expiration date on our relationship, then I got to get it in writing. So as long as you're not demanding exclusivity, and as long as you're not specifying a period of time, the latest we have to get our oral buyer agency agreement in writing is before we're ready to present the first offer. And understand, writing an offer on somebody's behalf is different than presenting an offer on somebody's behalf. If I'm writing an offer on somebody's behalf, I'm filling in the blanks. I'm asking the questions. How much do you want to offer? When do you want to close? Do you want any seller pay closing costs? We're getting all the terms, we're filling in the blanks. I fill in the blanks, I have them sign it, the buyer, and then I contact the seller or the seller's agent and say, I'm sending you an offer. That's what we mean by present. I'm contacting the other side and letting them know that I'm presenting an offer. We appreciate you guys' consideration. We look forward to hearing back from you. Have a nice day. Please and thank you still go a long way. Is this the same form as the buyer's agency form? An oral buyer agency agreement, is that what you're asking? I don't have a form for this because it's oral, but it is express, which means we created this orally. Maybe we had a conversation, but even though it's oral, it's still express. So I'm going to tell you what it means to be my client. I'm going to tell you what it means to work for me. We're still having this conversation. Let me ask you guys, shake your head yes or no. If you have this conversation with somebody face to face, are you going to go home and follow it up with an email talking about, per our conversation, this is what it means to be in an oral buyer agency agreement? Everybody should be shaking your head yes, because what do we document? Everything. So if you're creating buyer agency with orally with somebody face to face, yes, go home and follow it up with an email. Yeah. So I hear you guys. We got some Julie, what if. I hear you. It's the what ifs that makes this class. What if you've been working with this buyer for the last, I don't know, 6 weeks, 6 months? In an oral agreement, they finally find the one. I hate to break this to my HGTV fans. Buyers want to see more than 3 properties. This isn't a show of 3 and then they're going to decide. It's not the way it works. You could be out with them for months, long periods of time, and then they finally find the one and they say, write it up. And you say, great. Before I can present this offer on your behalf, I need you to sign this buyer agency agreement. Again, can I make anybody do anything? Can I put the pen in their hand and force them to sign? So the question is, what if? What if we've been in an oral buyer agency agreement and now I'm ready to present an offer and they're refusing to sign? Well, we got a couple options here. Either you say, then I can't present the offer on your behalf. If you don't sign this, I can't present this offer on your behalf. Pretty simple, right? In order for me to present an offer on your behalf, I have to have a written agency agreement. If they refuse to sign, then I can't represent them as a client. It's not over yet. Maybe we can convince them to sign a buyer agency agreement just for this one property. We have the option of limiting the location when I'm working with buyers. So I could say like the county or the triad. I could just say 456 Elm Street. Maybe I can get them to enter into a buyer agency agreement just for this one property. And if it works out, I'm your agent. If it doesn't, we haven't lost anything. Clearly, I need to keep trying to build your trust and confidence in me. So maybe I can get you back out for 6 more months, continue showing property. We may, and I'm going to stress the word may, be able to present the offer as a seller subagent. In this case, we're downgrading our buyer, aren't we? The buyer was flying in first class, but now we got to move them back to coach. Have you ever flown before and been asked to take your first class ticket and move back to coach? You pay more money for first class, right? Wouldn't be happy. I need you guys to hear me though. Switching from buyer's agent to seller subagent is not the recommended practice. This is like last ditch effort. And this is something that, again, it's got to happen on purpose. If I was the buyer's agent and now I'm switching to a seller subagent, who now gets all my loyalty? It's not the buyer anymore, is it? And before we make that switch, the most important thing is to remind my buyer what I know about them. Because once I make that switch and my loyalty is now to the seller, I got to share everything with the seller that I know about the buyer. It is not recommended that we make this switch. The commission frowns on this all day long. If you suggest or offer to make the switch, I need you to like triple document everything, right? Like have a conversation face to face, go home and follow it up with an email, a text, right? I need you to show that you explain to them what making that switch means. I'm a firm believer that if we are properly explaining agency up front at the beginning of the relationship, then we're not going to be here. Everybody with me? If we're doing our job up front, then we probably won't be here. And if you are here, you've done something to not gain the buyer's trust, not earn that buyer's trust in you. I think the biggest problem topic about this whole section is the fact that a buyer's agency agreement can be oral upfront. Please remember, this is an express agreement. Everybody circle the word express. Express means that the terms have been clearly stated. That's the only way I can proceed with an oral buyer agency. Remember, implied agency is not allowed. All agency agreements are express, which means the terms are clearly stated either orally or in writing. Question comes in, so you can be in an oral agreement for 6 months and still do showings? Yeah, if I haven't found the one yet. I wish I could tell you all your buyers are going to buy something within the first couple of weeks, but sometimes you're going to be with buyers for a while. There's no time frame on when they buy. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this after break, but taking us into break, I just want to show you in the online learning system, I just put this in here just to help us better understand. Again, I'm in the Unit 7 material, and you guys see here I have a sample oral buyer agency letter. So this could be used as an example. What do we document? Everything. So wouldn't this oral buyer agency letter, wouldn't this sample, which you can download stuff, so wouldn't this be a good way to follow up and to document that conversation? I'm look forward to working with you as your agent. We've already talked about our agency disclosure. Buyer has several choices. The purpose of this letter is to confirm the most important terms of our agreement. I'm going to act as your buyer's agent. I'm going to assist you in locating and buying. Agreement is non-exclusive. I will show you any properties. Our firm will seek compensation from the listing firm, not you. We're going to talk about your commission when we get into Unit 8. So again, the form helps you put words in your mouth. How do we create an oral buyer agency agreement with a buyer? Because we have an express agreement. We have an express conversation. We just don't start acting like their agent without having the conversation. And then you'll notice down here at the bottom, does the buyer sign anything? What's the buyer sign? They've already said they don't want to sign. I've not asked them to sign. I'm not creating agency. I'm covering my set. What's the other CYA? Cover your assets. See what I did there? Okay. It's the other CYA. And this is how you can protect yourself. As an example, I don't care if you go home and pound it out in an email. What I need you guys to hear is If you form fire agency orally, it's express, and everybody needs to understand the terms. And as an example of a sample letter, this is why I have this, just to kind of show you guys what we can follow up with. So let's take a break. We come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about oral buyer agency. Y'all, we are so close to ending up Unit 7. Is this exciting? We're getting there. All right. Are we back? Cameras are on. And I am going to take attendance. So we are in the throes of our oral buyer agency agreement. And okay, so what if they refuse to sign at that point? Well, if I have taken attendance, so if you're just coming back, please make sure you let me know so I can give you credit for being here this hour. An oral agreement, I can work with a buyer under an oral agreement until the time I'm ready to present an offer. If I am presenting, if the buyer refuses to sign, then I cannot present an offer on their behalf. I can no longer represent them as a client. Again, maybe I can get them in a buyer agency agreement just for that one address. That could definitely be an option. So it's not over yet. The commission frowns on doing this switch, downgrading somebody from first class to coach, downgrading somebody from client to customer. If you are going to do that, that buyer needs to understand, well, first off, we need to make sure that the seller and the seller's agent allow seller sub-agency. Remember, not all firms offer it, not all sellers want it. But the thing here is the buyer needs to understand they're getting the downgrade. So I'm working with this buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. Okay, this is where we are. And let's say this buyer in our oral buyer agency agreement becomes interested in a property that my firm has listed. My buyer client, my oral buyer client becomes interested in a property that my firm has listed. We're heading into dual agency now, aren't we? To allow the showing, I can have oral consent from my buyer. I can have the conversation orally about dual agency. Remember, we don't have anything in writing at this point. So if we first had this conversation and the buyer says, no, 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 I don't like the idea of dual, I'm not doing it. Okay. We can always revisit it. Please always remember that about dual agency. We can always revisit it with our clients, have conversations. So let's say, you know, again, 6 months now, and your buyer hasn't found anything. And all of a sudden something comes on the market that your firm has listed. They previously had said no to dual agency. Now, 6 months later, they want to see something. Let's revisit dual agency. Let's have this conversation about them, with them again. If they have already said yes or no to dual orally, I can get them to change orally. Once they say yes or no to dual in writing, the only way to change that is in writing. And I think that's and that's what we were talking about the other day with that situation 2. Where was it? Situation 2, I told you guys to cross out on page 162. Basic contract law. Contract law 101 says, once we have an agreement in writing, the only way to change anything is to change it in writing. And dual agency, oral dual agency, absolutely supports that. What questions on oral buyer agency do we have? All right, for the last piece of unit 7, put agency aside for a second. Let's just put it aside for a second. And the last piece of unit 7 is just talking about, in general, the nature of the brokerage business. We'll talk more about a lot of this as we go, just introducing it to you right now. We've softly introduced you to the broker in charge, also known as the BIC. Every office location has a designated broker in charge. Each office location has one person that's been designated to work for and be responsible for the activities that happen in that office. We're going to talk about being a BIC. We're going to talk about how you become a BIC. All that is in the comments when we get to license, law, and commission board. But for right now, we just need to understand that there's one BIC per office location. So if you're a firm with 5 offices, how many designated BICs do you have? Firm with 5 offices, how many designated BICs do you have? Yeah, you got 5, one under each roof, okay? When we talk about the BIC being responsible for all the actions, they're making sure everybody's following agency and disclosures and, you know, keeping their forms, and the advertising is in compliance. Probably one of the BIC's biggest responsibilities is you guys. Once you get your license, you're going to be on provisional status. You guys will be known as PBs, provisional brokers. I consider, you know, remember, we're all brokers. So provisional broker is a broker, and you can go out and perform the same duties as a full broker, as long as you are under the direct supervision of a broker in charge. Guys, they're not going to hand you a license and let you run amok on the street helping buyers and sellers. So let's pretend that it's the day you pass your state exam. This is a good day. Today is the day you pass your state exam. Yay. They're going to hand you or mail you a real estate license. But guess what? That license is inactive. You can't work under an inactive license. As a provisional broker, to activate your license, you have to affiliate with a firm. You have to have a broker in charge take you under their wing. And as we've mentioned, that BIC should be in your back pocket. That BIC should be going with you to listing appointments, buyer consultation appointments, asking you how you're going to solicit today, how you're going to get clients, da-da-da-da-da. They are with you to help you start and build your new business. More on this, the BIC and the PB, when we get to the comments. But all brokerages, again, what we need to know right now, all firms have a broker in charge. They're responsible. And again, one of their biggest responsibilities is you guys. I call you guys my provisional brokers. I call you guys my my brokers with training wheels. You can't ride your bike just yet. You can only ride your bike with training wheels, the BIC being the training wheels. What if they're interested in property management? They can be affiliated with a property management firm. A PB can be, but the PB is not acting as the property management. There's another full broker that's acting as the property management, and you're working under them. So you're still under that supervision of that property management. All provisional brokers are inactive until you affiliate with a firm. Once you affiliate with a firm, you can do just about anything that a full broker can do, but you got to be under that supervision. If you choose a firm, do they have the option to tell you that they're not going to work with PBs or they're not hiring any more brokers? Absolutely. Firms can do whatever they want to, as long as they're not violating license, law, and commission rule. Some firms will tell you, I don't want to talk to you while you have provisional status. Drop that provisional status and then come talk to me, or get 3 years experience and then come talk to me. It's okay. There are plenty out there that will. I'm always going to encourage you guys to shop around, talk to 2, if not 3 different firms, because they're all different, you guys. So you need something to compare and contrast. Somebody says, my husband's a BIC. Can I work under him? Or is that a conflict of interest? That's entirely up to you. Do you want to work under your husband? I mean, that's entirely up to you. The commission will allow it. That's up to you. Just real quick, I know I'm going to start getting a lot of questions. I don't want to get too far off topic, but just because I know I got a lot of questions going. How do you drop that provisional status? How do you just become a broker? you got to take 3 post-licensing classes. So once you get your license, there's 3 30-hour post-licensing classes. And once you finish post-licensing and pass the tests, then your provisional status is removed. So in other words, to drop that provisional status, you need further education, you need further training. And yes, I just said that there are tests at the end of post-licensing. They're just in-class tests. You don't have to go back to the testing center. And I'm here to tell you right now, post-licensing is not near as intense as pre. However, you still got to pass tests. So you still got to like do the work, pay attention, know the material. Again, just introducing you guys to this. We will talk more about it. I'm always available for, individual questions. If you want to reach out to me outside of class. The other part about talking about the nature of the business is whether or not you guys are going to go in as an employee or an independent contractor. Most firms bring in their brokers as independent contractors. We hire the employee. The independent contractor affiliates with us. As an independent contractor, who do you work for? Who's your boss? You work for you. So if you and your boss are having a bad day and you're not real happy with your boss today, go look in the mirror, as you are one. The employee has their working conditions dictated. The employee is told, you will punch in Monday through Friday at 9 o'clock, you will go to lunch from 12 to 1, and you will punch out at 5. The employee is told to do what they do during those times that they're clocked in. The BIC doesn't tell me what to do. The BIC doesn't tell me if I want to work today. The BIC doesn't tell me if I want to start working at 9 or if I want to wait till 6 o'clock tonight. The BIC doesn't dictate my work conditions. They'll offer me support. They're going to help me out, but they cannot make me perform. If I don't do work today, if I don't work today, then I know I'm not going to get paid for it. It's like that. I mean, it's pretty simple. You can take the day off. I think everybody should take a day off. I think everybody should go on vacation every once in a while, but you're not going to get sick time as an independent contractor. You're not going to get holiday time. You guys with me? If you don't work today, then you're not going to result in anything that will get you paid later down the road. Probably the biggest difference between employee and independent contractor is how we're paid. The employee is paid salary or hourly. The employee gets a W-2. With a W-2, your taxes are withheld from each paycheck. An independent contractor, you're paid a commission. You're paid a commission per transaction. You got to have a transaction to get paid. And the independent contractors are paid on a 1099. With a 1099, your taxes aren't withheld. But never fear, at the end of the year, Uncle Sam is still standing there with his hand out, waiting to collect. Uncle Sam is still standing there going, wow, Julie, you had a great year. Pay up. Has anybody worked before as an independent contractor? Anybody? Maybe a few of you. I highly recommend, if you've never been an independent contractor before, I strongly recommend your first year in sales, talk to an accountant, talk to a CPA, because they'll be able to tell you like how much from each commission check to withhold. So when Uncle Sam comes collecting at the end of the year, it doesn't hurt so bad. They'll be able to tell you things that you may be able to use as a tax write-off, like mileage, advertising, that kind of thing. So I really recommend at least your first year in sales, if not more, but at least your first year in sales, you talk to an accountant to make sure that you're taking advantage, if nothing else, taking advantage of the things that you can, and make sure you're withholding enough taxes so when they come due, it won't hurt so bad. Question comes in, is it true if you're within a firm and you don't produce sales, they will let you go? Every firm is different. Could some firms say, you didn't make me any money last year, you're out? Sure. Could some firms say, you didn't make any money last year, what can I do to help you make money this year? Everybody's got a different agenda. Some of you may want to be a top producer and have 40, 50 closings a year. Others of you may just want to dabble and do 1 or 2. There's a firm out there for everybody. Questions? All right, I got some questions for you guys. Here's a scenario. You guys read through it, start thinking about your response, and then we'll talk about it all together. So let's see what this situation says. The listing agreement does not authorize dual agency. Seller has said no to dual. A consumer contacts the listing company to see the property. The broker reviews, they're working with real estate agent disclosure, and they offer to show the property as a seller sub-agent, cautioning the buyer that nothing the buyer reveals is confidential and the buyer should act as if they were talking directly to the seller. If the buyer agrees, the broker provides written notice of seller sub-agency and shows the property. My question to you guys is, did the listing agent do anything wrong? Anybody want to unmute and share your thoughts? Do we want to be shy today? Guys,
No,
in this case, yeah.
no, they didn't do anything wrong. I don't think they did. I don't know. I don't.
You don't think,
they
you
did.
don't know? You don't think, you
I
don't
don't
know?
think that they did. Because it doesn't authorize dual agency. It's not a client. It's a customer that's inquiring about it. So
You got it.
okay.
In
Okay,
this
so I'll
case,
hush.
the agent did everything right because their seller client said, no, we're not doing this dual. This agent in no way attempted to create dual. This agent didn't offer that. They offered to show it as a seller sub-agent with the buyer being a customer, because isn't that what's in the best interest of my seller? It's hard for me to sell your house if I can't show it. So when we have a buyer interested in seeing it, isn't that what's in the best interest of my seller? Is to show. Somebody asked, can they still show it? Yeah, because that's what my seller wants. That's what my seller needs, so I can sell it. But had they attempted to create agency, had they attempted to offer to be a buyer's agent, that's where they went wrong. But in this case, this agent did everything right, because the very first sentence says the listing agreement does not authorize dual agency. Now, what if I show them this house and they say, gee, that doesn't work with me. Can you show me others? Well, maybe now we can have that buyer agency buyer agency conversation, right? Maybe now we can create buyer agency. It's just this seller that has said no to dual. It's not all the sellers, just this one. And you're right, he did. Wasn't he pretty clear, cautioning the buyer that nothing the buyer reveals is confidential? Because who's my loyalty to? The seller. The agent did good. So thank you, Rhonda, for going out there on a whim. I appreciate that. The agent did good. You did good.
Thank you. I didn't think it was right.
I heard it. I heard the hesitation, but you nailed it. Absolutely. All right. Here's another situation. Again, I'll give you just a minute to read it and then we'll talk about it. So this situation says the listing agreement, again, does not authorize dual agency. Everybody with me? The seller has said no to dual. A broker in the company is working with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. The buyer now wants to see one or more of the company's listings, including this one. I should put that in there, including this one that the seller wants, has said no to. In this case, as it stands right now, shake your head, yes or no. As it stands right now at this moment with what we're looking at, can I show this buyer this listing? Yes or no? Can I show this buyer this listing? We're about 50-50. As it stands right now, I cannot. Why? Because the seller has said no to dual. So let me ask this again. As it stands right now, can I show my buyer this listing? No, because the seller has said no. Is it over? Is it a done deal? Well, not yet. Hang on. In this scenario, if we haven't already talked to the buyer about dual agency, because remember, we're in an oral agreement, so we can get the buyer's oral consent. And remember what I said, we can always revisit dual with the seller. So the seller has said no in writing. And now let's pretend that it's 9 months later. The seller hasn't had much interest. They haven't had much activity. And all of a sudden they hear about a buyer that's interested in seeing in their home. Might they be more apt to change their mind? Might they be likely to say, yeah, whatever, let's do dual so we can get this buyer in here so I can get this home shown? As it stands right now, no, I can't show it. But what we need to understand is the parties can change their minds. We can always revisit and have conversations about dual agency later. In this case, I got to get the buyer's consent to dual orally because our relationship is oral. But I'd have to get the seller to change their mind in writing. They already said no in writing. Contract law says the only way to change anything is in writing. So as long as we get the buyer's head nod, yeah, whatever, we'll do dual after we explain it to them, and we get the seller to change the listing agreement from no to yes, now I can show. It's not over yet, but we've got to revisit it.
I'm a little confused.
Okay.
So the seller has said no to dual agency, but the broker in this situation, it says the buyer has vocally agreed to not do dual agency, correct?
broker in the company is working with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. They now want to see this company's listing. So they haven't said yes or no orally yet, according to this situation. They've just agreed to do oral buyer agency.
Okay.
There's agency, and then there's dual agency. Dual agency is a separate conversation. You know, with buyers, we may be able to, you know, go for weeks and show buyers properties that are listed by other firms, right? With buyers, we don't have to have the conversation with dual until that opportunity comes up, until they say, I want to see something listed by your firm. You know, depending on the size of your firm, if there's only 5 of you in the firm, you may not have that many listings out there. So they may not come up that often. If there's 500 of you in the firm, you're more likely to have a buyer interested in something that your firm has listed. I thought the broker is working with the buyer. He represents the buyer. That's right, under an oral buyer agency agreement. But to do dual, I got to get both of them to say yes. To do dual, I got to get both buyer and seller's consent. So just because you've agreed to work with me in an oral buyer agency agreement means nothing about dual. You've just agreed to work with me in an oral buyer's agency agreement. Now that the opportunity for dual has arose, now we got to make sure that you are in agreement to do that and that the seller's in agreement to do that as well. You guys are right. Oral buyer agency is a form of buyer agency. But oral buyer agency has nothing to do with dual. And that's what we got to get that consent for. That's what we got to get. See those little hamsters, those little hamster wheels running. Let's look at one more. So this one says the listing agreement authorizes dual and designated. So far, so good, yes? But the buyer's agency agreement is in writing. We're not doing oral buyer agency. We have it in writing. And guess what? The buyer has said no to dual. They do not authorize. But now the company has something on the market that the buyer wants to see. Is the game over? Do you have to look at your buyer and say, well, don't know what to tell you. Is it over? Not yet. We're going to revisit it, aren't we? We're going to be like, look, when we first formed our relationship, we had the conversation about dual and what that means. And at that time, you had said no. Now that you're interested in something that my firm has listed, the only way I can get you in that front door is if you reconsider dual. And that's where we need to, guys, we may be having conversations with sellers and buyers about dual agency a couple times. We're going to have it at the beginning so they understand, but then we need to go back and revisit that when we have the potential for it to happen. Let me ask you guys something. Last week, the first time I introduced you guys to dual agency, did you feel like a dual agency expert? Did you feel like you had dual agency and you understood everything about it? I see you shaking your head no, and I appreciate your honesty. If that's the way you felt about it, how's your seller or buyer going to feel about it? You think you explain it to them once and they'll be like, got it, I could pass a test on it. No, it's something that we may have to revisit. What have I been telling you guys? You got to revisit agency. You got to keep going back through it and the several different sources we've given it to make it click. Because as things happen, progress in the transaction, we may be able to go back and revisit dual agency. We may have to go back to make sure that they understand. It's not a one and done. It wasn't for you. It's not going to be for your clients either. This is why they hire us. It's not their job to know dual agency. Whose job is it to know dual agency? Yeah, point the finger to yourself, right? Raise your hand, something. And that's what I need you guys to understand. If we're doing our job right up front, they have a better understanding of what's going on. How do you do a better job up front? We're familiar with the forms. We understand dual. Y'all going to go to your family tonight, sit down at the dinner table and explain dual to them? Doesn't that sound like a fun dinner topic? Dual agency. But again, if you can explain it to them in a way that they understand it, then that's getting you guys not only prepared for your test, but getting you going in that career. If you sit there at dinner tonight and explain dual agency and your family looks at you and goes, huh? I'm going to venture to say that you need to go back, review it, revisit it. Does this make sense? This is becoming your job. This is where we're starting. We're not covering everything you need to know about dual agency in this class. We're going to see you in post licensing. I got a post licensing. One of those 3 classes is called Brokerage Relationships and Responsibilities. That's a fancy way of saying agency, isn't it? So we're going to get you in deeper in post licensing. You're going to get even deeper when you start working with buyers and sellers. But we're starting here with this basic understanding. You can go back and revisit it. You should. They can change their minds. If the agreement was in oral, they can change it orally. If the agreement was in writing, the only way to change it is in writing. What questions do I have? All right, I got some questions for you guys. You got your private chats set? Everybody ready? Yes or no? I hear from everybody. I need to hear from everybody in these chats. Remember that class participation thing that we talked about? I need to know you're here and paying attention. So the question says, the commission's working with real estate agents, working with real estate is a mandatory disclosure. Question is, must it be given in all brokerage transactions at first substantial contact? Does that word all stand out to you guys? Does that word all, that's an absolute words that we talked about on day 1, right? Does that word all mean anything at all whatsoever? Yeah, that word all means everything. Must it be given in all brokerage transactions? No. It's only required with sales. Is a lease transaction a real estate transaction? Is lease really? Yeah. So do we have to give this thing in lease transactions? No. Thus, do we have to give it in all transactions? You guys see what they may try to do to you on your tests. Every single word means something. And a lot of you in your chat, a lot of you said, no, Julie, it's sales only. No, Julie, and I appreciate you guys. It's only required. I think I just bumped on somebody's moral compass. Can you choose to give a disclosure to your landlord and tenant as a property manager? Can you choose to? Sure. There's no rule that says that you can't. The rule says that it's only required in sales transactions. If you're going into property management, might you choose to do it? Yes, but guess what? That's not what your test is going to ask you. Does everybody have a right to know where they stand in the transaction? According to the Real Estate Commission, only buyers and sellers. Everybody with me? Okay. That's a fun one. Let me ask you another one. Yeah, another yes or no. So does the working with real estate agent disclosure apply to commercial sales transactions? And the answer is yes. Why? Because in a commercial sales transaction, you're working with buyers and sellers. Sales is sales is sales. Whether you're selling a house or a large commercial building, sales is sales. Draw a line down the middle. Sales is on one side, lease transactions are another. Sales are sales. If you're doing a commercial lease, the disclosure is not required. What the commission cares about is it's some kind of sales transaction. What questions do I have on this? Everybody ready for what's next? Everybody ready to have your attention? We did it. Everybody feel like you accomplished something? My goodness, we've been on Unit 7 for like the last 2.5 classes. We have accomplished something. Unit 7 is a big one, you guys. If nothing else, by the amount of time that we've spent in it. Are you going to see lots and lots of test questions from Unit 7? Yes. Do you need to understand agency for the real world when you're out there actually working in sales? Yes. Unit 7 is important. Those keywords back at the beginning of Unit 7 on page 134. There's the key point review, which again is a good summary. Unit 7 is a lot to take in. And I'm a huge fan. The more ways, the more places you can expose yourself to this information. If you're spending time with it, if you went over it over the weekend, you probably already had stuff starting to click. Did you visit it the second time and go, oh yeah, visit third time and go, huh, that's what we need. You guys need to revisit until it all clicks. Questions? Well, what I want to do now before our break, when we come back, we're going to get in. Oh, I just hit stop sharing. I did not mean to do that. Sorry about that. Hang on. When we come back, we're going to get in to Unit 8. But what I want to do, and by the way, we're going to Kahoot on Thursday. I got a little agency Kahoot set up for us. So this will be a good recap in Unit 7. So you guys know this is coming. So we'll do that on Thursday. So what I want to do right now, I have briefly introduced you guys to the Real Estate Commission's website, very briefly. Encourage you to kind of start poking around and seeing what all you can find in here. We looked at, for example, where you can find the current license law and commission rule here on the homepage. The two tabs that I think are most of note to you guys when looking for educational material, you guys see up at the top, there's a publications tab and then there's a resources tab. And I think these are great places to start. Again, we're not spending all of our study time on this website, but it is such a plethora of information. I think if you guys can start introducing yourselves to it, clicking on around on it, you're going to find some good stuff. But one thing the commission offers here under resources is a video library. Everybody see this? So we come to ncrec.gov, we go under resources and video library, and they have videos for everybody, the consumer, brokers, da 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 da. But if we look at for brokers, there's two videos. I'm going to show you one, but there's two in particular that I think you may want to go check out on your own. The commission offers the consumer a video about working with real estate agents if you're a seller. They offer a video about working with real estate agents if you're a buyer. Now, I'm just going to show you the buyer video, but I want you to know that there's two. And I think this is yet another good place for you guys to get this information, to hear it again and again and again, so it'll click. So we're gonna do this video, and then we'll take a break, but we're gonna play this video. Are we?
Are you considering buying a house or other real estate? If so, you may want a real estate agent to guide you through the process. Here at the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, we want you to understand the different ways you can work with an agent when buying real estate and the services agents can provide. You have several choices about how a real estate firm and its agents will work with you. For example, you may want them to represent only you as a buyer agent, or you may be willing to allow them to represent both you and the seller at the same time as a dual agent. You might even prefer to be unrepresented and work directly with the seller's agent. Some brokers will offer you a choice of these services, and others may not. Whether you choose to work with a buyer agent, dual agent, or seller's agent, that agent must treat you honestly and fairly and tell you about any material facts that the agent knows about or should know about that could influence your decisions in the transaction. The Real Estate Commission has developed a disclosure form called Working with Real Estate Agents to help you understand the different kinds of agency relationships. The form emphasizes the importance of not sharing confidential information with an agent until you know the agent represents you. The Real Estate Commission requires every real estate agent to review this disclosure form with you and to ask you to sign it before receiving any confidential information from you or assisting with your purchase. The Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure is not a contract. Signing it does not obligate you to work with the agent who presented it to you. Your signature is just an acknowledgement that you've received the disclosure form. The Commission also publishes a brochure entitled Questions and Answers on Working with Real Estate Agents. Now, this brochure explains what a real estate agent's duties are, what services your agent will provide for you, and how the agent will be paid. You can download the brochure for free from the Commission's website at ncrec.gov. If you choose to have a buyer agent or firm represent you, they owe you certain duties. First, the firm and its agents must promote your best interest ahead of all others. They must be loyal to you, follow your lawful instructions, and give you information about the property that could influence your purchasing decisions. Your agent must also use reasonable skill, care, and diligence throughout the process and account for all money they receive on your behalf. Once you've agreed that a firm or agent will represent you, they may not give certain confidential information about you to the seller or the seller's agents without your permission. Confidential information includes your motivation for buying or your negotiating strategy. For this reason, don't tell the agent anything that you don't want a seller to know until you enter into an agreement to hire the agent. A buyer agent will help you find a suitable property, gather more information about properties you're interested in, prepare and submit an offer, order inspections, and prepare for closing. A buyer agent may be paid in different ways. Often, the agent will seek payment from the seller or listing firm first, but if the seller and listing firm refuse, then you may have to pay the buyer agent yourself. You and the agent will address the firm's fees in the written buyer agency agreement. So be sure to read and understand any agency agreement before you sign it, and make sure it includes any promises that the agent has made to you. You'll also be asked to indicate in the buyer agency agreement if the firm you're hiring would be allowed to participate in dual agency. Dual agency is when the firm that represents you also represents the seller at the same time. This is most likely to happen if your buyer agent's firm has a listing agreement with the owner of a property that you want to purchase. In a dual agency situation, the firm and its agents owe equal obligations to you and the seller rather than only representing your interests. Because of this, your agent may lose their ability to advise, counsel, or advocate for either party. In order to reduce the conflict of interest inherent in dual agency, some real estate firms may offer a type of dual agency called designated dual agency. And this is where one agent within the firm is designated to represent only you, and another agent within the firm is designated to represent only the seller. Neither agent should have confidential information about the other party at the time of designation. This type of dual agency allows you and the seller to be more fully represented because it allows your agent to advise you and to negotiate and advocate for you. For more information about the duties and responsibilities of real estate agents, visit the Commission's website at ncrec.gov and click on the Publications tab, or just give us a call.
All right, so just again, something the commission offers to help the consumer better understand. Remember, that's their whole point, is protecting the public. And one way that they can protect the public is by helping to educate the public. So the commission provides educational materials. They have us, and that's why we want them, is to call them with everything real estate. Questions or comments? Concerns? Okay, let's take 10. We come back. Unit 8. Are we back? Welcome back. All right, so I am taking attendance. Cameras are on and I can see you. And I do want to show you guys one more thing before we go into Unit 8. Back in our online learning system, the Unit 7 material, I also got a couple of other, these are like summary of important points. There's a summary of important points about material facts. It's like material facts in the bulleted version. Then there's also a summary of important points about agency. Again, the bulleted version of it. These are actually straight from our continuing education class this last year. Remember what we keep saying, you're going to notice once you get your license and you have to take CE every year, you're going to notice these topics pop back up over and over and over again. And there's good reason why. It's really important that we understand. So again, another resource, another tool to help you guys wrap your brains around this. So I would spend some time with the bullet points. You got the videos on the commission's website, your book, the online learning system, YouTube channel. You just got to keep revising it. I can't express this enough. This is not a one and done. You keep reviewing it, keep going over it, and you will continue to do so in your career when the stuff pops back up in continuing education. So still on agency, we're not totally done with agency. But now that we've talked about agency, the different types of agency relationships, Unit 8 is more specific about the agency contracts. So we're going to officially introduce you to our agency agreements. Again, talking about how we form that agency relationship between us, our firm, and the client. So our roadmap for Unit 8, we're going to explain the agency contracts, look briefly at those. We're going to talk about a North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. We're going to talk about what this act means and who it applies to. We're going to get more in specific about working with sellers and working with buyers. And then at the end of this unit, we get to pick our calculator up again and do some more math. But guess what? This is fun math. This is commission math. So we're going to help you. Look at y'all smile. I love it. So we're going to figure out how you can figure out how much you're going to get paid. Another important math that we have is helping the seller figure out how much they're going to get. Do you think it's common for a seller to look at you and say, when you sell my house, how much am I going to get? You think that's a common question? Yeah. So why are they selling their house? Probably to get some money. So we're going to show you guys how you can help your sellers figure out their net. Seller net is just how much they're going to get. We won't get to the math today, but we will see it on Thursday. So please look ahead. Look at that math in Unit 8. So you're ready. You're ready for commission math. So before we start, this is just a reminder. We've seen this before. But we're starting to get more into, particularly when we look at our forms, our agency agreements, we're still going to get more into the verbiage. Thank you. So we said the people that are working with the buyer, they may be identified as the buyer's agent or the buyer's firm. But what we're going to see on the forms is that the people working with the buyer are going to be labeled as the selling agent and the selling firm. They are the ones selling the home to whom? They're selling it to the buyer. Not to confuse that with the seller's agent or the seller's firm. Those are the ones working with the seller And again, on our forms, the official verbiage that we're going to see is the listing agent and the listing firm. So making sure the difference in our ings and our ers. So on page 188, we start talking about our agency contracts. Written agency agreements that are in writing must. You guys see my absolute word? Written agency agreements must be signed by all parties. The client is going to sign the agency agreement. The agent will sign on behalf of the firm. So the buyer or seller will sign. The agent will sign on behalf of the firm. Because the agent signs it, it must include your 6-digit license number. Remember, good rule of thumb, if you sign it, you're going to follow it up with your license number. All of our written agency agreements have to have a definite termination date. They have to have a definite end date. How long is our agency agreement going to last? That's completely negotiable between you and the soon-to-be client. Maybe you do 2 weeks, maybe you do 6 months. Your firm may have policies about how long they have agency agreements for. The market, a lot of times, may dictate how long we have agency agreements for. Last year, we didn't need listing agreements for long. 10 years ago, we needed them for like 6-9 months. So the market very well may dictate how fast things are selling, for example. May dictate, but again, your firm will help you out. And then all of our written agency agreements have the non-discrimination clause. The non-discrimination clause says that we, the firm, are not going to discriminate against the protected classes. The protected classes as identified by fair housing. So we're going to look at this non-discrimination provision when we look at our agency agreements. But keeping in mind, we've got a whole unit dedicated to fair housing, and that's Unit 19. So we're going to identify the protected classes when we get to Unit 19. Some written agency agreements that we may encounter. We've talked about the listing agreement. The listing agreement is between the seller and the firm to help the seller list and sell their property. There's a buyer's agency agreement, which is between the buyer and the firm to help them locate and purchase a property. And then there is a property management agreement, which is between the owner and the firm to allow the agent to manage their property, a rental situation. Probably one of the more important things that we can understand very early on about our agency agreements, our agency of contracts, is that they are employment contracts. We are being hired to do a job. What did I just say? You're being hired in the listing agreement. You're being hired to help the seller list and sell their property. And that's all I'm being hired to do. The seller can't like boss me around and make me come over on the weekends and mow their grass and get the house ready. That's not why they're hiring me. They're not hiring me to be their little go do it, Julie. They're hiring me to help them list and sell their property. It's very specific what we're being hired to do. All agency agreements must discuss compensation. Why? All employment contracts must discuss compensation. Would you do a job and not once question, am I going to get paid? How much am I going to get paid? When am I going to get paid? One of the big reasons why we have these agency agreements is to ensure you get paid when you've done the job that you've been hired to do. Our listing agreement and our property management agreement must be in writing from the beginning. I cannot perform a single service for an owner of a property without first having a written agency agreement. Again, you guys, another problem topic, and please listen to me. Buyer agency agreements are the only ones that can be oral at first. Buyer agency agreements are the only ones. You're never going to have an oral seller agreement. You're never going to have an oral owner agreement in a for lease situation. So why do we use a listing agreement? Well, I just told you, you get paid with an agency agreement. You're not going to get paid if you don't. There's one big thing. It's the employment contract. It creates the relationship. But another thing a listing agreement does is it creates inventory. We are going to talk about, we are just pages away from the multiple listing services. I feel like we've danced all around it. So we're actually going to talk about it in a second. But once you have become a member of the local multiple listing services, part of what you agree to in your membership is that we're all going to pool all of our listings together. Not a good salesman if you don't have a product to sell, do you? It's kind of hard to call yourself a salesman if you don't have a product. And one thing these agency agreements do, one thing that we do when we pool all of our listings together, is it gives us inventory. It gives us a product to sell. Maybe you have a listing agreement, maybe you don't. Maybe your firm currently has a listing agreement, maybe they don't. But because we've pulled them all together, we've created an inventory. And now I can offer buyers the opportunity to view any home that's available in the multiple listing services. I currently have 0 listing agreements. So I went from 0 inventory to probably 2,500 is the number in MLS right now. Does this make sense? It creates that inventory. It allows us to work together, all for the common purpose of bringing buyer and seller together. Brokeraging the transaction. So before we jump into these agency agreements, let's back up just a bit, rewind, and let's have some conversations first about how the heck I get these clients, how the heck I get these sellers and buyers, where do they come from? I'm not here, remember I told you on day one, I'm not here to teach you how to be a real estate agent. And I'm not here to tell you how you can or cannot get, well, can get business. What I am here to do is tell you there are things that you cannot do to get business. Think outside the box, okay? So what are some things you cannot do to get business? Well, I can't solicit another agent's clients. Once I know they are in an agency agreement, hands off. Sellers, I know if they're in an agency agreement because their listings in MLS. They can't get an MLS if they didn't hire somebody. That seller, if they're not my client, they are somebody's client. Buyers, we may just have to ask. Has anybody ever been to an open house and had the agent look at them and say, are you currently working with an agent? We're not being nosy. I just want to know if I can proceed with you, because if you say, yes, I have an agency agreement, hey man, that's cool. Back off. So we can't solicit. Now that's a violation. NAR's National Association of Realtors. And that is a direct violation of their code of ethics. You will learn all about the code of ethics once you affiliate with your firm and you join the local board of realtors. You'll have to do new agent orientation. And part of your new agent orientation will be to learn a lot more about the National Association of Realtors and their code of ethics. Not everybody has to join NAR though. NAR, maybe your firm requires it, maybe they don't care. So not all brokers have to join NAR. If you choose not to join NAR, that still does not give you the reason, the excuse to solicit somebody else's clients, because you could still be held guilty of what's called tortious interference. And tortious interference is just wrongfully interfering with somebody's business relationship. You can be taken to court. So sometimes the question comes up. Everybody understand what I mean solicitation, me going after the business. Sometimes the question comes up, what if the seller who was in a listing agreement contacts me? What if they reach out to me and they say, I'm not happy with my agent. Can you become my agent? Well, first off, are we going to document the fact that they contacted me? Are we going to make sure that we're clear that I didn't go out to them? I see head bobbing. Yes, 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 yes. Guys, if they call you and say, I'm not happy, we still need to honor the fact that whether they like it or not, they are still currently in a listing agreement. And probably one of the first things we need to do is ask them, did you talk to the broker in charge of that office? Did you talk to your listing agent? Did you talk to the broker in charge? Because even though I know we want the business, but you do not want to be that agent that has the reputation of taking everybody's clients. Everybody with me? First off, we already decided it's not allowed, but we need to encourage that relationship. If that agency agreement is going to end soon, or if the BIC agrees to allow the seller out of that agency agreement, then we can start working with them, but not until they're out of that agency agreement. So when they call you, don't say, oh, well, just tell them to let you go and then I can start working with you. We still need to honor that. Again, encourage them to work it out with the BIC. And I would almost take it a step further. Before I started helping this seller, I would take it a step further and say, yeah, can you send me that signed termination agreement? Just so I know. Maybe I'm not trusting of sellers, I don't know. But I would want to see it just so I know that it is a done deal and I can begin to proceed. So one thing I'm not allowed to do is solicit somebody else's active clients. Makes sense, right? I just looked up, Bernice, I'm going to pick on you. I just looked up and saw you. Could you imagine if I had a listing and Bernice was going through the MLS and she called my sellers and she said, I see you've been on the market for 6 weeks. I don't know what Julie's doing or what she is doing. I don't know, but I tell you, I can do a much better job. Did Bernice do good? No, in Bernice's mind, she might be trying to get the business, but excuse me, who's that relationship with? Thank you, Bernice, for letting me pick on you. We've got to honor those existing client agreements. Another thing we need to take into consideration when we're trying to find and solicit consumers, when we're trying to find clients, we got to abide by the do not call rules. The do not call registry, if you sign up for the do not call registry, it puts your number in this database. And before you decide that you're going to get business, that you're going to solicit consumers by picking up the phone and calling them, you need to cross-reference that phone number with whether or not they're on the do not call. Now, you got to purchase the list. Maybe your firm will help you with that. We're not getting into all that. What I'm telling you is before you pick up the phone, you need to make sure that they're not on the do not call. If they are, you can't call them to solicit. If you don't look at the list, you're in violation of the do not call laws and registry. We're going to talk in just a second about what that violation. Now let's understand what the do not call. And by the way, I get questions all the time. What about all these? I get 18 robocalls a day. Is anybody else like bombarded with all these robo? I don't know how they get away with it. I have no idea. I wish I could report them somewhere. Don't we all? I don't care about robocalls and all those solicitations. I care about us as the real estate agents. Do I have everybody? So we can, it's called cold calling. You can't cold call without getting your hands on this registry. There are some exceptions. If you have somebody that's on the do not call, but they were a former client, maybe you had a listing agreement, maybe you had a buyer's agency agreement. If you used to have a relationship, even if they're on the do not call. You can call them for up to 18 months or until they tell you to stop calling. So my listing agreement expired yesterday. I can call that seller today, even if they're on the do not call. I can call them for up to 18 months or until they tell me to stop calling. If it's a consumer and I got your phone number from a soft inquiry, maybe you came to my open house on Sunday and filled out the open house registry and left me your phone number. Didn't you leave me your phone number? Even if you're on the do not call, I can call you for up to 3 months or until you say, stop calling. We always honor the request when they say, please stop calling me. Another example might be if somebody fills out the customer form, the contact me on your website. So if they reach out to you on your website and they put their phone number in, again, they have given you their number. So we can call them for up to 3 months or until they tell you to stop. And then if you have the for sale by owner that's on the do not call, you can call that for sale by owner only if you have an interested buyer. You cannot call the for sale by owner to solicit their listing if they're on the do not call. So the only time we're calling this for sale by owner is if we have, let's call them a legitimately interested buyer. That's what they're advertising, right? They're advertising they want buyers. So some exceptions to when I don't need to honor the do not call. Violations for this. Yeah, I mean, they're all at the bottom of page 189. Federal level, you're looking up to $11,000 per call. State level, you're looking at range from $500 to $5,000 per call. That just added, that's an expensive phone call right there, isn't it? We've got to honor the do not call. If they're not on the list, call away. Again, you got to get your hands on that list to know if they were there or not. Another way that we may try to solicit consumers is through mass email. When it comes to mass email, we need to honor the CAN-SPAM Act. Page 190, CAN-SPAM, you don't need to know this, just kind of FYI, but it's the Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing Act, CAN-SPAM 189. What the CAN-SPAM Act says about mass email is you have to provide an opt-out. Anybody ever get a mass email and it has the link at the bottom, teeny tiny, that says to unsubscribe, click here. You got to give them the option to opt out. You got to give them that unsubscribe. If they reply to your email, they don't click on unsubscribe, they reply to your email and say, please remove me from your mailing list, then we need to honor their request. So I've told you some things that you can't do or need to proceed with caution. Why don't you guys share with us in a chat, what are some things you can do to solicit? What are some things you can do? If you can't call them, you got to be careful in how you email them, and you can't solicit somebody else's listing or client. What are some things you can do to get yourself out there? Business cards, social media, door-to-door, newspaper ad, mailers, flyers, billboards. If you go door-to-door, please be safe. Please take a buddy. And if that door says no trespassing or no soliciting, Does that mean you can knock on that door? They've already said no solicitation, no soliciting. Again, you guys, the sky's the limit on how you can get consumers, how you can get, back in my admin days, and I did my new agent training, one of the first homework assignments I ever gave you guys. I gave homework back then too. One of the first homework assignments I gave new agents, and maybe you want to make a side note, maybe you want to hear what I'm saying and make a side note about it. I told all of my new agents to take a piece of paper and write 1 through 100. And then list 1 through 100. Who do you know? Because all those people you know, they know people. And you don't know who they know. And I'm going to tell you, the first 40, 50 people is really easy. Like family, friends, people we go to church with, people we work with, right? The first 40, 50, 60 is really easy. After that, boy, it starts getting challenging. And you start thinking yourself, I know my mail carrier. And I know my dentist. Might your dentist want to buy or sell a house? Might your dentist know somebody that wants to buy or sell? Questions on how we can and cannot solicit? Somebody said business cards. I've heard a real estate coach say before that when he walks out of the door every morning, he has 5 business cards in his pocket, and he doesn't allow himself to come home until he has delivered all 5 of those business cards. That means every day he puts a card in 5 people's hands. It's kind of a numbers game, isn't it? If you give out enough business cards, somebody's bound to call you. If you give out no business cards, how many people are going to call you? Yeah, see, it's a numbers game. We may also have the opportunity to work with or conduct businesses in other states. If we are going to another state as a licensed agent, we are going in as a foreign broker. If a licensed agent from another state is coming into North Carolina, they're coming in as a foreign broker. You can get paid as a foreign broker. You can refer the business. So if you have anybody have family in another state, so when you're making your list of 1 to 100, don't discount them. Even though they may be in Iowa, we still want them to call you, because you can refer them to an agent and we might be able to get your referral fee. Referral fee is the easiest money you'll ever make. I mean, Bob, this is Linda. Linda, this is Bob. Poof, when it closes, you get a referral fee. How much? I don't know. I'm not your firm. Your firm has policies on referral fees. This is the big thing to know. If you are getting a referral from somebody in another state, that foreign broker cannot come into North Carolina for the purpose of conducting business. They're not licensed here. Same thing goes if you're sending a referral to Iowa. Can you go to Iowa and visit your family? Sure. You cannot go to Iowa to help them in that real estate transaction unless you're licensed in Iowa. And that's what we mean by a foreign broker. And this is why we're allowed to do things like referral fees. Another thing to talk about when working with consumers are antitrust laws. This is Sherman's Antitrust Act. Sherman's Antitrust Act doesn't just apply to real estate. The whole point of Sherman's Antitrust Act and for these antitrust laws is we don't want to have monopolies. We don't want to have one firm, one business manipulating the entire industry. So antitrust laws are meant for an open market. They're meant for an open free trade market with healthy competition. They're not going to restrict trade. And remember, real estate is a market, so we absolutely fall under this category. And there are a couple different antitrust laws that are specific just to real estate. Price fixing, this is important. Price fixing says that the firm determines the commission. How much commission are you going to charge the seller? How much commission are you going to charge this buyer or this owner in a property management situation? There is no fixed price. It is a firm policy how much we expect to collect when we do the job. You will get asked about this all the time. You'll be sitting in your listing appointment, and the seller will look at you at some point in the listing appointment and say, how much are you going to charge me? What's your pricing? We need to be very careful how we answer that. Do not say something like, all of us in this area charge the same amount. You just engaged in price fixing. You gave the perception to the consumer that it's a fixed price. Your response to that question is, my firm charges X amount. My firm's policy is to collect X amount. The local board of realtors does not set pricing. The North Carolina Association of Realtors does not set pricing. The National Association of Realtors does not set pricing. And the North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not set pricing. It is up to the firm and the firm's policy. Now that we're going back, some of the conversations that we've had, remember I just said, if you send a referral to an agent in another state, you may be entitled to a referral fee. How much referral fee? That's not a flat across the board. It's up to the firm's policy. How much referral fee? How much commission? That's what we mean by price fixing. We cannot fix the prices. NAR can't stand there and say all brokers are going to charge X amount. It's up to the firm's policy. What questions do I have on that? Another antitrust law that we see sometimes in real estate is called group boycotting. With group boycotting, 2 or more businesses or 2 or more people are getting together to conspire against somebody else. We are getting together to try to drive somebody else out of the business. We can't badmouth our peers. We can't badmouth other vendors in the business. Let's say, for example, you're acting as a buyer's agent in this transaction, and your buyer has a home inspection, and you were really disappointed. Your buyer was disappointed with the home inspection report, the home inspector themselves. It just wasn't a good experience. First off, before we all get too excited, can we all agree that everybody has a bad day? Do you ever have a bad day? Sure. So maybe the home inspector had a bad day. Maybe this is just how the home inspector does their business. I don't know. But just, be kind. Maybe they just had a bad day. Regardless, what you can't do, you can choose not to refer that home inspector to your next buyer. You don't have to recommend that home inspector. But what you can't do is go to your office, share it with your peers that you had a bad experience, and then look at all your peers and say, let's all agree to never use this home inspector again. That is group boycotting. We can't come together for the purpose of driving somebody else out. I'm here to tell you, if the home inspector is that bad, they will drive themselves out. They don't need your help. There's a difference in being a bad home inspector and having a bad day. They do not need your help, and that's what group boycotting says. We can't work together to push somebody out. The other one we have here is allocating markets or customers. We can't divide the markets or the customer. Remember what we've been saying. My real estate license says I can work any property that's located in the state of North Carolina. I may choose to only work one county. That's my choice. And I can do that. But let's say you and I meet up, we're working together, and you and I decide that we're going to divide and conquer. And I say, all right, I like Forsyth County and you like Guilford County. We can't look at each other and say, I'll do all the business in Forsyth, you stay out. You do all the business in Guilford, I'll stay out, right? I have just as much right to go to Guilford County as you do to come to Forsyth. That's what we're doing when we're dividing the markets. I have just as much right to be there as you do. We can't try to come together to divide those markets, divide those customers. Penalties for violation of Sherman's Antitrust Act 191, next to the last paragraph down there. These are no joke. Now we're looking at $100,000 in fines and possibly up to 3 years in prison. Goodness. We start talking about your commission, bottom page 199, entitlement to a commission, earning a commission. Typically in real estate transactions, we're either paid a percentage of the sales price or a flat fee. What does the word of mean? The word of means what? Multiply. So typically what we see is your commission as a percentage of the sales price. We're going to look at examples on Thursday when it might be a flat fee. In order to get paid, you and your firm have to have an active license. If the firm allows their license to go inactive, you're not going to get paid. If you allow your license to go inactive, when we get to license law and commission rule, we're going to talk about active, inactive, how you can keep it active. Again, what we need to know right now is if you or your firm want to get paid, then we need to have an active license. The other piece of this, in order for you to earn your commission, is you either have to be affiliated with a firm that has a listing agreement. We're going to call you the listing agent, or you're the one that brought that ready, willing, and able buyer. Did you bring them as a buyer customer, or did you bring them as a buyer client? You're the one that brought the buyer. So you may be entitled to receive a commission. Remember, with buyer customer, that's that seller sub-agency thing. The firm and the seller have to agree to allow seller sub-agency. One thing that we're going to understand more and more about, there's a difference. And when you earned your commission and when we actually get paid. My job is to connect buyer and seller. Once I find that seller a ready, willing, and able buyer, I've connected the two, and technically I've done my job. I've earned my commission when I connected the two. I usually don't get paid until and if it closes. If your buyer or seller do not complete the transaction, can you, the individual agent, go after that commission? Can you take the seller to court and sue for your commission? Shake your head yes or no. You, the individual agent. You, the individual agent, who's the relationship between the seller and who? The seller and who? The firm. You, the individual agent, don't have the right to sue buyers and sellers. Guess what? They're not your client. Whose client are they? The firm. Is your firm going to go after a buyer or seller that doesn't complete the transaction to collect commission? I don't know. I'm not your firm. I can't answer that. I will tell you this. Most firms don't. Firms don't want that reputation of being known to drop the seller to the seller at the drop of a hat. Word like that spreads like wildfire. How many sellers are going to hire your firm when they learn that they're probably going to wind up in lawsuit in a court with you? Does that make sense? And this is why we need to understand there's a difference in when I earn my commission and when I actually get paid. I earn it when I connect the two, when I bring the two together. We don't get paid until it closes. When it closes, it's the firm that gets the commission check. The firm shares their commission with you. So the firm gets paid, and then they pay you per your independent contractor agreement. How much are you going to get paid? It's up to the firm's policy. Remember, I think you guys should shop around. I think you should talk to 2 or 3 different firms. Guys, price fixing, there is no across the board. Firms don't have to pay you 90%. It's up to their policy, how much of their commission they share with you. So another good reason of shopping around. When you guys start talking, anybody talk to firms yet? Anybody talk to a few? It's okay if you want to start talking to firms. You can tell them you're in pre-licensing. You're going to get your license. They may not want to have a overly serious conversation with you right now, but it's okay just to kind of start poking around, shopping around, and see who you might want to talk to. If I were you guys as newly licensed agent, I would have questions for the firm. Obviously, how much money am I going to make? What's my compensation split? But if I were you guys as newly licensed agent, just as important, if not more important, is what kind of training they offer. What kind of training do they offer new agents? What kind of training do they offer me when I've been in it for 5 years, 10 years? You guys make the decision of who you want to affiliate with. And I don't know how you can make that decision without talking to a few, deciding which one is the best, which one is right for you. There's something in your book, just make a note on page 192. It's in bold down there called procuring cause. If there's any question about who brought the buyer, procuring cause usually comes around with the buyer. And if there's any question about who is the one that procured that ready, willing, and able buyer, we may have to prove procuring cause. And that's just showing which agent started this ball rolling. Who was the one that introduced this buyer to this property? Who got this thing going? And you're going to have to prove. And how do you prove yourself with anything? Documentation. I see your mouths move. Thank you. Again, there's a difference in when we earn it and when we actually get it. I wish I could stand here and tell you guys that all buyers and sellers make it to closing. I wish I could, but the truth is they don't all make it to closing. Sometimes they terminate. When we talk about earning commission, we talked about percentage of sales or flat fee. I want to go back just for 1 second. And to me, this is out of place in the book. So I want to make sure we cover it. Hold your place in the book. We're on page 192. Hold your place in the book and skip ahead with me to page 218. .218 is in the throes of breaking down our agency agreement. We're going to talk about this then on Thursday. But 218 specifically mentions the brokerage fee, and it talks about that second paragraph there. It can be a commission, a percentage of the sales price. It can be a flat fee. It can also be something called a net listing. Net listings are not illegal, but they are highly frowned upon. In a net listing, the agreement is that the seller is going to receive X amount and the firm will collect anything above that amount. And the concern is, whose best interest do we have? If the seller says I have to make $100,000, what's to stop me from listing it for $200,000 and collecting $100,000 commission myself? You guys see what I'm saying? I should be looking at the seller and saying, look, if I can put $200,000 in your pocket versus $100,000, isn't that how you old car? Isn't that what you do? You look out for the best interest of your seller, not for yourself. I don't know why net listings are still legal. I don't think they should be. Nobody ever asked me. However, we don't see them. They are highly frowned upon. It's an obvious conflict of interest because we're not operating with our client's best interest with these. We're operating with ours. If you sell the house for $200,000 and you're working as a percentage of the sales price, aren't you going to make more money? When your sales price goes up, your commission goes up. Yes? Yes. So no net listings. The other thing I think, speaking of that percentage of sales price, remember what we said when we did old car, the price point doesn't matter. Didn't I just say you're going to make more money the higher the sales price? Does that mean I need to negate the duties for a buyer that's not buying as high as one that is? I owe old car no matter what price point you're at. Once you sign an agency or enter into an agency agreement with me, I owe old car to the buyer that wants to buy a $5,000 piece of land. I owe old car to the seller that wants to sell $1 million home. And everybody in between. There is a commission rule about our commission. 58A.0109. Again, I'm not going to ask you to read it. I just put it here for reference. If you want to learn more about your commission, we're talking about it. We're just introducing it to you guys. Questions or comments? We're on 192, 193. Real quick, you guys notice on page 194 is our listing agreement. Over on page 205 is our buyer's agency agreement. Guys, the forms in your book are out of date. Don't look at the forms in your book. Go to the online learning system. I have the current in the online learning system for you. So make yourself a note. I've actually stapled mine together so I don't accidentally look at them, right? But just make yourself a note. Whenever you come across a form in a book, you should have a little red flag that goes up that tells you to go to the online learning system. So we're going to start introducing you guys to this idea of working with sellers. We won't get through this today, so we'll pick up wherever we leave off. But back on page 192, we start talking about pre-listing activities. Somebody calls you and says, I'm interested in selling my house. Can we meet? You do the happy little silent dance, you know, right? And then you say, oh, thank you so much for calling. I'd love to talk to you about it, right? We're scheduling this listing appointment. Y'all just going to show up on somebody's doorstep without learning anything about the property whatsoever. You're just going to, well, I got an address. That's all I need. I'm going to show up for my listing appointment. Before we go to the home for our listing appointment, this is why it's called a pre-listing activity. We need to learn as much about the home as we possibly can. This is where we're going to the GIS tax records, NCDOT, school board, what school line is it in? Ideally, by the time I get to my listing appointment, maybe I've even driven around the neighborhood ahead of time to see where we are and what's around and what's nearby, gotten our hands on the location. Ideally, by the time I show up for the listing appointment, I know everything about the home except for what the inside looks like. If it's previously been listed in the MLS, I have a history. Every time it's been in MLS, they never delete. So I could maybe look at pictures to tell me what it used to look like before these guys bought, but I have no idea what they did to it while they owned it. Maybe they knocked down a wall, maybe they didn't touch it. But ideally, we should know as much about the home as possible before we show up. Is it in an HOA? What do the covenants say? What are the restrictions? Competitive listing appointments are very much a thing right now, very real. Competitive listing appointment says that the seller is going to talk to 2 or 3 agents before they decide who they're going to list with. You may or may not know that you're in a competitive listing appointment. Some sellers will tell you, some may not. I need you guys to treat every listing appointment as if it was competitive. Take your A game every single time. So again, I look up, I see one of you, I see Nicole. Nicole, I'm going to pick on you. Hi. So Nicole and I, unbeknownst to us, are going on a competitive listing appointment. Maybe Nicole's going in the morning and I'm going in the afternoon. And Nicole shows up and she knows about the proposal that DOT is thinking about doing, considering doing out front. She knows the taxes. She knows how much the seller paid for taxes last year. She knows about the school board. She knows about, what else did we say? The covenants. She knows what the HOA is. Nicole did her homework. Then later this afternoon, I show up and I'm looking at the seller going, is this in an HOA? Do you know what school zone you're in? You don't happen to know your zoning, do you? Who's the seller going to hire? It's no contest, is it? It's no contest. Nicole's going to get that listing because she proved to the seller that she was willing to do the work. So we're learning as much about the property as we can before we go. Obviously, we don't have all of our answers, our questions answered. But that's why we have all these public sites that we can go check out to learn about it before we get there. We're also going to want to gather some documents. We're going to help the seller get some documents together. Don't we want to see the deed? Do we want to see the deed? Don't we need to know who our current owner of record is? If that deed lists 10 names on it, you have questions like, are these 10 grantors married? If so, are they on board? Are they willing to sign the agency agreement so they can list the selling property? Your sellers, maybe they want to share their survey with you. Maybe they got a survey when they purchased. I'm not going to make it available to buyers unless I have their permission. But it'll help me learn about the property lines. It'll help me learn about things that are within the property lines. We need to ask the seller very early, maybe not in a pre-listing meeting, let's not get too excited, but very early, we need to ask the seller, what are your liens? What are your debts? How much do you owe? And if the seller starts rattling off, I owe this and that, this and that, and this and that, and this and that, I should have a little red flag go up at some point to think, can they afford to sell this home? Because if they owe more than what the property's worth, I need to have questions like, can you bring money to closing? Most sellers get money, but guess what? Not all. Anybody ever hear of the housing market crash? 2008, 2009, 2010? It was rough. It was rough. And one thing that was rough, a lot of sellers were bringing money to the closing table. A lot of sellers were underwater. In all seriousness, do you guys want to have these conversations with the sellers early on? Or do you want to wait and get to closing and find out they don't have the money And you went through that whole thing for nothing. We got to get deep and personal with sellers early. We got to ask the hard questions early. Again, maybe not necessarily in a pre-listing because I'm, still trying to win them over. But my point is we've got to get this information early. So we're going to, we're going to end here. Don't go anywhere just yet. Questions about anything so far? Consider this. A lot of the listing agent's job is done up front before you ever see the home for sale in MLS. We just don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to put a listing in today. There's a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of stuff that's done up front before you ever see it on any of the websites. And that's the conversation that we're starting to get into. So what are we doing on Thursday? We're going to keep working our way through Unit 8. We're going to look briefly at our agency agreements. I got the listing agreement and the buyer's agency agreement is in the Unit 8 material in the online learning system. So you're welcome to start looking ahead. We'll come prepared to do math on Thursday. I don't know how deep into it we'll get, but I won't be surprised if we don't get that far. So bring your calculators and come prepared to do that. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about what next week looks like. We keep going forward. No rearview mirror. Questions? All right, y'all go get some sunshine. I'll see you guys first thing Thursday morning. Thank you.